All right, we are in the Community Development Standing Committee for April 3rd, 2018. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. I'm going to propose a modified agenda, given the fact that our item number 1 has been removed. One of my colleagues and myself are wondering if we might just have a general discussion with staff about the Cheekeye fan lands and whether council can have a bit of a discussion with staff around treating, the current policy and how it impacts current lands, and maybe to just be able to advance the discussion in a more general terms as opposed to the specific application. So kind of looking over to staff, hopefully they're a little bit ready just to...
Probably not, and that was a concern that came to us over the weekend. That's going to take us perilously close into OCP discussions, which could then potentially introduce new information, and then we would jeopardise the public hearing and advancing the OCP, which is coming up next 17th. Sorry. So while we were going to provide a bit of background and keep this discussion particularly to the application and try and avoid those policy level discussions, because we might compromise the public hearing we've already had on the OCP. So some reservations about wading into this issue today.
Okay, well, Councillor Race.
Fair enough, and it was me that had the discussion with Councillor Black and Wolf, just around the extent of the policy, whether we can maybe think about restricting it in certain areas, and having a discussion around whether it's residential, industrial, is it the same standard, etc. So, but I understand the concern, but maybe I'll just make that comment for potential for a future discussion.
All right. So, that being said, I'll look for a mover for the adoption of the agenda as it's laid out with item number 1 deferred. Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Mayor Heinzman. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have committee meeting minutes from our last March meeting. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll seek a mover for adoption. Moved by Mayor Heinzman, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Okay, so moving on to item number 2. We have the Building Bylaw update.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Velaniskis, Director of Community Planning. With me today is Jesse Abraham, who's our plan checker and who's quite familiar with the step code, and Richard Matthews, of course, our Chief Building Inspector. So the item we have today is the update of the Building Bylaw, which staff have been preparing for over the last number of months, and it's essentially the objective is twofold. One is to propose a number of administrative changes that are necessary because the bylaw dates back to 2004, and I think that's when the last time it went through a comprehensive review. And the second objective is to prepare for the implementation of the step code. So maybe first we'll cover off the step code stuff, and then we'll go into the administrative changes that are proposed. So the BC Energy Step Code, it's an incremental approach that the province has come up with to achieve a standard that would see net zero energy ready buildings by 2032 across the board. So all new buildings being net zero energy ready, meaning that a building just needs to add the technology that produces energy in order to be completely net zero in terms of energy consumption. It's a performance-based approach, so the step code does not dictate how you do things. It just establishes the efficiency standards. So what the building and what the energy level the building should be achieving. It's not how you can do it. It's what you should be doing, or what level of energy efficiency you should be achieving. Municipalities are able to subscribe to any level. At the moment, municipalities are able to subscribe to any level in the step code. The step code ranges from 1 to 5. And the district established a working group in 2017 to assist in informing and educating the development and building industry, and to set achievable targets that industry can reasonably accommodate in Squamish. And so the committees, or the working groups, work is now finished. The building code breaks down buildings in two primary parts. Part 9, which is detached houses, duplexes, townhouses, small apartment buildings, and small commercial spaces, which includes office or industrial units. And Part 3, which are larger buildings that are 4 stories or taller, and also larger commercial buildings. The step code also follows a similar path. So for Part 9 buildings, there are 5 efficiency steps, and there are 4 efficiency steps for Part 3 buildings. And that relates to residential buildings only. The step code has 3 steps only for commercial buildings, for Part 3 commercial buildings, because efficiency is much harder to achieve in spaces that have a lot of foot traffic, let's say. So this is just a graph showing the energy efficiency levels from 1 to 5, 4 being 40% better than the building code, than the current building code demands. And step 1 is basically assessing what level of energy efficiency the building is achieving. So it's not increasing the efficiency level, it's just understanding the efficiency of the building. And here's another graph showing Part 3 residential buildings. So level 3 being 50% better than what is currently required by the building code. The BC Housing commissioned a study in 2017 looking at what are the anticipated costs of the step code. And for steps 2 and 3, for Part 9 and Part 3 wood frame construction buildings, the anticipated cost is not significant. It's less than 2% of the construction cost. Step 4, which is the highest step for some Part 3 buildings, can be achieved for less than 3%. And step 1 is really a fraction of 1%, because all you're doing is assessing the level of efficiency, meaning that you have to employ the services of the energy advisor to design the building, as well as to test it before the occupancy, so for air tightness. So with the assistance of the working group over the last year, we are proposing a 2-phase approach in terms of implementing the step code. So for Part 9 buildings, which would be the small Part 9 buildings like secondary suites or carriage homes, those that are under 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, we're just proposing step 1 over the 2 phases. So just assessing what the level of efficiency is to minimize any increasing costs and continue facilitating the creation of carriage homes. For Part 9 residential buildings, so the homes that are over 1,000 square feet, it would be step 2 by this summer, and then step 3 in summer of 2019. For Part 3 buildings, for residential buildings, it's the same as Part 9 larger residential buildings, step 2 this year and step 3 next year. And we're proposing that for Part 3 commercial buildings, we continue the step 1, similar to carriage homes, basically, just assessing the level of efficiency rather than increasing it. We also are following the lead of other municipalities in the North Shore area in introducing a requirement for any property that is rezoned after July 1st, 2018 to be 1 step above the efficiency requirements than would otherwise be required. I don't know if we want to have a discussion now about the step code before we move on to administrative changes.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks. In the small buildings, 1,000 square foot and smaller, I don't understand the strategy there. Why wouldn't we want them efficient as well?
It's based on air changes per hour, so when you have such a small building, it's really hard to do an accurate air change per hour when it's that tiny, because you have so much large mechanical equipment trying to make the air change happen and to reduce the energy cost, but it's very difficult.
What about the insulation and all the double windows and triple windows and all those things that come with the step code?
Yeah, they'll still be applying to the building, to the envelope, but it's just meeting of the air change per hour, which is going to be difficult to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mayor Heinzen.
Yeah, I thought we were going to be a lot more ambitious on this. I'm wondering if you can outline exactly what the North Shore has done.
So I believe the North Shore is going to step 3 this summer.
On all 4 of those?
No, not all 4 of them. And maybe Jesse or Richard can speak to it a bit more.
Just for residential buildings, the North Shore for Part 9 and Part 3 buildings, they're doing step 3 as of July of this year. However, they're already at step 2. So North Vancouver is already at step 2, and so for them, this is just an incremental step up. We are not as prepared.
So they would have done step 2 in December? How long have they been at step 2? I didn't think we could do it until January.
They were already doing a performance-based approach before this came into effect. So technically, they were already at step 1. The city of North Vancouver was at the time before this came into effect. As of December, they went to step 2. And then as of July of this year, the whole North Shore is going to be at step 3.
Yeah, but it was only the city, not the district or West Vancouver district.
The district may have been at step 1 currently. Yeah, so I mean, altogether, they would be at step 3 as of July. The city was more ambitious. Yeah, but currently, District of North Vancouver and City of North Vancouver have already implemented the step code.
I'm wondering if you could, maybe outline if we chose to go to the same as North Shore right off the bat, what would be unintended consequences of doing that?
Probably just the fact that we haven't implemented step 1 versus the other municipalities that have done it seem to have done a phased approach. So it's just be more difficult for the building industry to go to that level right away.
I mean, in our working group, sorry through the chair, in our working group, we had this discussion, and there was a sense that because North Vancouver's been sort of on this track a little earlier than us, some of their builders are a little bit more further along in what this means and how to do it. And there was a concern that some of us, particularly smaller builders, might struggle with this initially, hence the sort of stepped approach. And if they struggle and they fail, they're going to fail at the end of the process at occupancy when it's the trickiest to remedy. So we've chosen an approach that you're going to have to comply. So compliance will come, the final compliance will be known only at the end of the project. And if they're going to stumble, they're going to stumble at the end. And so there's a sense that let's ease them to step 1, then 2.
And as a compromise, and no disrespect, as a compromise for you going from step 3 or to step 3, we could implement step 2, still continue lunch and learns throughout the whole process till, say, January of 2019, and then implement step 3. But I mean, we can still do lunch and learns, different people, we can bring them in for talks on how to make your building tighter. This is what we're going to be doing up to July. We've got guest speakers coming in, we've got demo houses going to be put on. So we just thought it would be better to break them in.
You haven't quite convinced me yet, but why would we not be able to go at least on part 3 to step 3? I mean, these guys are building bigger buildings. These builders should be nimble enough to be able to.
Yeah, no, I agree on the larger, like muds and that. I do agree with that because they're already building to that standard down in the city. So for them to come up here and lower their standard,
Yeah.
I do agree, but I think for the single-family dwelling and the duplex and the smaller builders, I think we're going to have to just do a little hand-holding at first, just to get them used to the different processes.
Councillor Spellman and Councillor Hill.
Thanks. Commercial buildings are generally where most of the energy is lost, and I'm wondering why they're also the easiest to remedy. They're generally boxes, they just need insulation, triple plane windows, and ventilation. So I'm wondering why we're not being more aggressive with commercial buildings. If we don't have many commercial buildings being built, I don't think, maybe one. So why not be a little bit more ambitious on the commercial buildings?
We do also have mixed-use buildings. We have commercial on the lower floor, residential above. The residential up above will be at a higher step. The commercial down below, it's hard to maintain an energy level because of the public going in and out. The doors are always open.
Is it measured while it's sealed?
I'm sorry?
Is it measured while it's sealed though?
It would be measured while it's sealed, but it's maintained while it's sealed. So they can't take into account what's going to happen and the volume of people going to come through. So you could build it to, say, a step 2, but as soon as you have public come through all day, it won't do any energy efficiency until at nighttime when the shop's closed, and then it'll be energy efficient at nighttime, which it would in the interim anyways. Well,
So it's
that's
not,
step 1.
it's not really, maybe, it's not as efficient because of the community building.
Yeah, it's harder to maintain an energy efficiency when you have that volume of traffic going in and out. And sometimes, if you notice, in the summer, the stores will keep the doors open, so you can't really maintain any value of energy efficiency when you do that.
Because we've built buildings with no ventilation. So now we're building buildings with ventilation. It's actually going to be more efficient to keep our buildings shut if we have a higher energy step code. So building and just forcing the triple pane windows in the winters when they are shut. And also you can just put a little lobby in to,
Yeah, little vestibules, yeah.
and it's super easy to mitigate with larger commercial spaces. So I would like to see commercial buildings go up to at least step 2.
Councillor Elliott.
So I have a bit of a question. If I'm building a home and I build it to step 1 now, but by 2032 it has to be net zero ready, am I doing other things to my home between now and 2032?
You could prepare your house to be net ready zero now, just by simply making enough roof area so that you would have solar gain through panels. You would orientate your house on the lot so that you would have solar gain through your windows in the summer and the winter. Your cooling would be offset by the orientation on your lot. So there's a lot of variables you have right now. There's, I believe, 2 houses that are net ready zero. As soon as the people wanted to put the electrical photovoltaic panels on the roof, it would be ready to go.
So whether we're building at step 1, 2, or 3 for Part 9 buildings, by 2032, even if it's was built at step 1 versus step 3, it can achieve?
No, you would have to look at your energy costs with your insulation and everything else. So building it to step 1 is going to be a little different because it'll be more of an open building. So you're going to allow.
Just want to clarify that by 2032, it's any new buildings that will be built after that will have to be net energy ready.
Like your
So there's,
So nothing.
the building stock
Yeah.
is significant that will not be able to meet that standard.
Yeah, I think that's the struggle I have, is that it's only 14 years away, and in a lifetime of a home, it's such a small amount of time.
It's huge in a life cycle of a house.
Yeah, and I guess I don't understand the last piece under that table, rezoned after July 1, 2018. So after July 1, where we're moving to step 2.
So
I would
say
have
if you were bringing in a proposal for a multi-unit dwelling, but you had to rezone the lot, and it was after July 1st, then you would be automatically having to produce a building that's 1 step higher.
So I'd be step 2.
Yeah, and that's basically a model from North Van, the city of North Van, because they have complete subdivisions that are step 5. And that was the reason that they did that, as you probably know down there. But They have large subdivisions that are step 5 right now.
Again, this only would apply to Part 3 and Part 9 residential buildings. So the way the bylaw is written now, it would still exempt secondary suites, garage homes, and commercial buildings.
So I have Mayor Heinzman on deck, and I'm just going to say that definitely, I think for like everything else, I'm not sure, but for Part 3 residential, I think we should go with the highest step that's tolerable, like in terms of what's being done on the North Shore right now. Recognizing the fact that the bulk of the units that are being built right now would fall into that category, and also, as was alluded to earlier, that most of the builders, they're from Vancouver doing these big projects, so I'm not that concerned about their ability to adapt. For the single family home buildings and duplexes, maybe sort of that adjusted, accelerated timeline that was talked about earlier, I'd be okay with that. I do understand the adjustment period for that one. And then the commercial one, I don't know about that one. I'm also wondering if we can get that going a little bit better. But anyway, Mayor Heinz.
Yeah, generally agree with what Jason just said. I'm trying to understand, and with the commercial buildings, they're only open 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day. Most of the day, it would really be helpful to have a really more energy efficient building, so I think we should definitely choose higher than step 1. I'm trying to understand, get into the mind of the local builder who's building a house or a duplex. And if I was a builder, I would know that this step code has been coming for about 2 years, maybe even longer. And I would be getting myself up to speed pretty damn quickly, or no one's gonna hire me. So I'm trying to understand really what their challenge is in terms of accelerating their learnings to be able to achieve step 3. Like, I don't know how much more sophisticated this type of building is, and my understanding is it's more insulation and better windows and better doors, predominantly.
It's a lot more work in the building envelope itself, as well as the sealing of the envelope and understanding how the envelope goes together.
And you don't think local builders have kept up to speed on that as they should?
I don't feel that they all are versed in as much as some. And I feel that it will take a little bit of hand-holding to get them used to it. And that's why I think the lunch and learns, up to the date of when we're going to implement it, will be a true tale of whether they are going to be able to do it or not.
And is it our responsibility to handhold them?
No.
I would say it's the industry's
It is the
responsibility
industry's,
to
yes.
handhold them. And I would hope that the industry has been doing this. Like, I'm a little shocked, to be honest, that they're not up to speed. They're going to become obsolete very quickly unless they're up to speed. So
they
I would
will.
hope if they're a smart business person, they've been keeping up to speed on it.
Yeah. The industry is a little slow as well with getting information out, such as the Energy Advisors Association. They're a little slow to get all the information out of what's going to be pertaining to it. Canadian Home Builders Association, they're just putting packages together for builders right now of everything that's going to, what it's going to take to achieve the different levels. So
Well, they've been quite supportive of our efforts.
They have.
We have a sort of cooperative approach coming on with lunch and learns and some education sessions. It's just there's a concern that there are, I don't know how many, that some builders are going to struggle initially, and that sort of ease them into it. That was the approach that we've taken.
Do you think we're going to have a rush of subpar builders trying to get something built in the next year so that they don't have to achieve step 3?
I don't think that they're necessarily subpar. It's not it's how the elements are put together, particularly the way that the vapor barrier is handled through the construction process. And it's one of those things that I think is done rather quickly, but now will have to be done with considerably more care. And it's just a learning experience, but it's one of those things that is quite difficult to repair. And once you've sort of got the drywall on over the vapor barrier, if you haven't done that, it can be quite destructive to go back and try and fix it. So.
And just for clarity, the evaluation is done at occupancy stage, right? So everything how does it work? Maybe you could walk us through sort of, okay, a builder comes in, so they're going to build a house to the end date.
Correct me if I'm wrong too. When the builder will come in and they'll have a model of the house that they are going to propose to build. It'll show you the orientation on the lot, the gain, all of the heat factors such as your METI, your TEDI, tied with the house. And then
What are those?
Yeah.
Now, what does
But
that
then-
mean? You just use an acronym even though I don't know.
Yeah,
The thermal energy it's going to take to heat the building and the mechanical use of the building and all of that. And what they are proposing that it's going to mean for air changes per hour. So right at the very beginning when they're applying for a building permit, they should have an idea of what they're going to make. So as you say, that person that's doing their homework for them as the energy advisor should be able to tell them, this is the type of equipment you're going to use, this is the type of vapor barrier, air barrier system you're going to be required to hit this as a minimum. Am I right? Okay. So that would be a good indication there that they're either going to hit step 3 easily or step 2 easily. So from that circumstance, and I can see where you're coming, you would be able to tell right away that yes, they're a competent builder, or no, you do need to do some work. So when it comes down to that, you have a stop right there at building permit submission to where you could say you aren't going to meet step 3 easily, or you could easily meet step 3. And when you word it like that, I hadn't thought of it that way. So you do have a preliminary stop right there at building permit submission. And then as you do go through the permit and it's issued, then they have certain stops themselves where the energy advisor is going to come up. He'll do a review at the insulation vapor barrier, he'll do a blower door test, he'll suck and blow to make sure that it's sealed, and if it's not, he'll point out areas that needs to be taken care of. And then prior to occupancy, he's going to come back and he will do another blower door test and highlight areas that need to be fixed. And he'll be able to also establish whether he's going to be able to hit step 2, step 3, or step 4.
I have Councillor Elliott and Councillor Pratt.
So you mentioned hand-holding. I guess I'm just curious about, as the mayor said, what is our role in helping support the industry, and what are they doing on their own to help them get it?
Well, I know that HPO, Home Protection Office, offers a bunch of different courses. I believe that's BC Housing is a non-tech. Yes, and so they offer different courses for home builders and owner builders. The Canadian Home Builders Association also has different courses as well. You have to pay for those, but they do offer courses as well. We, as a municipality, at least personally, I would rather give them some lunch and learns and as much education as I can before the bylaw comes into place to cut down the questions and the concerns of when the permit does come in, and all of those questions throughout that whole building process. So if we can knock those out of the park ahead of time, that would be a bonus for us.
Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically the timeline that's up there, it gives a home builder one shot to learn. So you get to build your next house and do the best you can, and if there's a little screw up in it, then you learn, and the next time you won't do that. So that's the way I kind of saw it.
Councillor Race, the mayor.
Thank you. So with Part 3 buildings, I mean, I think significantly larger buildings typically, and so I'm a little less tolerant about that one. I would want to see higher standards. I noticed in the rezoning, I was just going back to check the report that is before us tonight for that MUD 2 building. They proposed to go right off the bat to step 4. And so I would hope that that is the approach that the industry takes right off the bat with those. The question, I guess, with commercial buildings, I mean, I can understand if you have one floor of commercial, which typically is some sort of retail or public access, and the issues around that. But if you have something like a cornerstone building, for example, where you have 4 floors,
That can be controlled.
yeah, and whether we want to aspire at least for a higher step for the above ground floors where the public is well, it's a little bit more contained. You're in a, you've got stairways and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if it's possible to do that, but I think, generally, once again, these are significant buildings, and I would be inclined to see if we could stretch for a higher standard right off the bat. I am, I don't know if forgiving is the right word, but I think, there's an entry level of builder, and I think we do want to take some role in educating them within reason. And so I look at that as being not too bad. I guess I wonder about what's phase 3 with these guys that we say are step 2 now, step 3. Is there ever a step 4? Do they ever get higher than that? Do we go to a next level with them at all?
Oh, most definitely. We can't go step 4 now until 2020. Then the province will allow you to go further. The only reason that West Van went higher up to step 5 and passed it because they went through the zoning bylaw and they wrote it in as special conditions for the whole subdivision. And so they got permission to go that route. But would you mind if I did a little bit of homework on the commercial buildings? I'd like to do a little bit of homework on the commercial, just to find out sort of the pros and cons and the reasons why, and if we can, I'd like to bring it back and share that.
Seeing why I had thoughts on that, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mayor Heinzman, Councilor Shaw.
So I'd like to hear back on the commercial buildings for sure, because regardless, they don't have people going in and out of them for 2/3 of the day, so you're going to get a gain there for sure. And I think I'm hearing generally part 3 residential buildings, step 3. And I'm looking at part 9 residential over 1,000 square feet and wondering if we really need a whole year to get those businesses. I mean, they're going to be building their buildings this summer. They'll get through majority of their houses within the next 6 months. That's their test houses, Councillor Pryor says. And that maybe by January 1st, so that we make sure we get all those builds for next summer on to step 3.
I agree. And then that way we can work them through that step 2 on that first house so that they know
That first 6 months,
Yeah.
they get 6 months instead of a year, but they need to get up to speed.
Yep. I think that's looking very proactive.
Thanks. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I'm generally supportive of that. My only concern of our housing prices, 2% seems low when you look at a number, but it's $18,000 per home on top of what we're being charged now. So the housing costs, I guess, are what most people are concerned about is adding, I think the general concern with step code in general out west is that our weather isn't as crazy as most areas. We're generally temperate, and we are making our buildings absolutely sealed, I guess. And since energy is mostly lost, so I can argue both ways. That's what I guess I'm saying is that, but where I do find the most, we're looking at residential buildings, but really commercial buildings, I wish that somebody made my building more energy efficient when I built it, because our energy costs are crazy. And if somebody had made my builder do a higher standard with everything, with the HVAC system, with the ventilation system, it'd be more pleasant for the people coming into my building in general. So I think going up to step 2 right away isn't a problem. And then even looking at step 3 for all the comprehensive buildings, I'd like to do. I'm interested in hearing back, but really I don't see any problem with a square box making it up to step 2. And since we have so many uses in our commercial buildings, we're not, most of our commercial buildings being built are not retail spaces where people are coming in and out to purchase. They're mostly office, or office or industrial, where it's closed and people are working inside the full day. So having energy efficiency and appropriate ventilation is actually a benefit to the person purchasing or leasing the units. So I would always go I actually reverse this and go step higher on the commercial buildings where you lose most of your energy.
Okay.
And I'm wondering too, maybe perhaps when you come back with the information on the commercial, if there's some general information out there as far as the return period on these kinds of investments, so that might help us better understand specifically for the commercial buildings, because those are usually triple net and they do pass the costs on right to the tenants. And
Okay.
so if we're looking at, 5-year versus 20-year or something return period, it might affect what kind of standard we're looking at perhaps. Councillor Race.
Thank you. So that would be a $900,000 house, just so we're clear.
18,000.
Not your average house, I hope.
No, that
Yeah.
is,
That's
that's
the-
The actually average house is 1 million.
No, it's
Construction
construction costs,
Oh, yeah.
Talking
not sale,
construction
construction.
So, which took me right off the chain. Oh, yeah. With all this, changing the subject slightly, with all this talk about air tightness and so forth, I was down in my basement this morning and bumped into that little indicator that I have hanging down there, testing for radon, and wondering, and I haven't had it checked yet, of course, it's not
I
quite the
haven't
3
got
months.
mine checked either. So we should send them together.
I'm not sure if
And
I'm getting zapped or not, but,
Oh, you don't want to?
but going back to that presentation we had from Dr. Nickel, I think it was, the cure seems to be ventilation, proper ventilation, and I'm wondering if that is also part of this? Is it somehow factor into this at all in the new building code?
No. The only ventilation that you're going to find that it's reflecting on for radon is from the ground. So what they're going to do is they'll drive a pipe in the ground and it'll be perforated and they will suck the air out of that only and it'll go directly outside.
That was the part I was thinking about,
Yeah.
yeah, taking it out of just underneath the
Just underneath the
building.
slab, yeah. And then it gets fired directly out at the top.
But that is part of the building code? Is it part of the building code now, or
It is part of the
coming?
building code for recognized radon areas, yeah.
Are we one of those?
No.
We're not.
That's a problem.
Ah, so we might become one.
We would
Depending
have
on
to
the test in
have
my basement, I guess.
climactic data, yeah. Brought in, yeah.
So just if I can follow up on this, so what would be involved in having us designated as such an area if there was evidence of it?
It would change construction practices here.
But who designates it or not?
Environment Canada puts out climactic data, so we get climactic data updates all the time. So Britannia, just as an example, it received a Zone 5. We're climactic Zone 4 in Squamish, and they just did a reassessment. It was climactic Zone 5 from 4, and that was just last year. So,
Is that a reflection of radon?
no, that's just a reflection of the rainfall, how much sun, how much wind, all of those. That's what they look at.
Who would decide if we were subject to radon radiation?
As far as I know, it's Environment Canada that assists in writing.
They would do that as well.
Yeah.
So they would look at these results and make a decision.
Yes.
Could I just follow up? Do we ever preempt that and just designate it ourselves?
I have never heard of that. I've only heard of it just being implemented from Environment Canada as recognized.
And if they did that, would we automatically be updated?
We would have a notification sent out to the municipality.
And do we have to do anything apart from just impose this standard on builders?
No. If we were identified as radon, then we would just have to change building practice and have them ventilate the ground and put in a ventilation system for that.
Doesn't require a bylaw change or anything like that? Thank you.
Mayor Heinzman, Councillor Bryan.
Yeah, one more thing about the rezoning after July 1st. We have, I can think of 3 large Cheekeye fan potentially coming for decision before July 1st. Polygon coming for decision before July 1st. One across from Group Hub coming first reading tonight. Thousands of units that is looking out 20 years. So just a rezoning, like, I'm kind of like, I don't want to rezone anything until July 1st now. So can we, all of these things are large housing projects that are meant to be around for 70 years and even not even be built for maybe 10 or 20 years. So it doesn't give me confidence when we have so many things about to be theoretically in front of council for consideration in the next 2 months.
If I may, some of those projects are going to take a long time to build. And just because they rezone at a certain date, they're still going to have to meet our step code requirements. So I think there's a really good chance that the majority of those projects are going to have to move with the program, whatever program we have or we will have in the future, because this isn't the end, obviously. So I don't think we'll be,
So just walk me through the Salterra one downtown. They've got first reading tonight, let's say hypothetically they get some approval sometime before July 1st.
yes,
If they're bringing if they're actually getting their, and it would be a part 3, would it not? So they would, if we went to step 3, they would.
they'll
have
just go to step 3.
They would just be step 3, okay.
Yeah.
It's more of the single-family home ones, for example.
Yep.
Cheekeye got somehow passed in the next 3 months.
By the time they're building it though, if our standard had changed, they would
Yeah,
have
they have to
to be
build
up
the
to that
structure,
standard.
okay. Okay, I got, I'm a little more comfortable now.
Yes, even the phase development agreement, I believe would freeze these standards in
Yeah.
place. This is basically the
But
building.
we could, in theory, put that as rezoning, could we not? Could we not say, why don't we just say all future rezonings have to go to step 3, period?
We could, with the date of the bylaw adoption, let's say if we can anticipate what the date of the adoption
Or
is, we
today.
can set it at that. We could set it, yes, we could, the date is flexible.
Okay, I have Councillor Carr, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Reese.
Yeah, just to the radon problem, aren't we being required to put the drain underneath the slabs now? The drain tile and,
We have drain tile.
yeah. So the provision is being built in.
Well, not really, it's drain tile for expelling water, it's just taking water.
Oh, so it's not being put under the slabs for the radon, but the pipe?
No, just to get rid of water, excess water. I wouldn't put it in my house if it's not recognized, it's just an extra expense.
I thought we were in the zone.
No,
That's why she's testing us.
she's testing this.
Well, that's what I meant.
Councillor Elliott.
So this idea of capturing rezonings that are happening now, you mentioned earlier that there are subdivisions on the North Shore that baked their step 5 into the rezoning.
They went all passive, so it's step 5 automatically.
Right, so couldn't we just make it a requirement of rezoning? So as a condition of rezoning, you are agreeing to step 3.
Yes, we could write it into the land development agreements on specific rezonings.
Until we get to July 1.
Yeah.
I have one question
I
back
don't want to lose that.
to you, Mr. Buckman. The cost of the recovery. Now, is that only in the commercial buildings?
I mean, it's probably easier to determine, I would think, than
Just basically, your commercial, large commercial buildings, not mixed use, or just for the commercial.
yeah, I mean, if there's readily things available for the others, that's great, but I
I'll have
suspect
one,
it might be
yeah.
a bit more challenging.
Okay.
Councillor Reese.
Thank you. So it's on this zoning thing again. So when I looked at that, so I'm wondering what stage of the zoning has to happen before or after July 1st. Is that 4th reading, or is that when the application crosses the counter?
No, it's adoption.
Adoption. So we could drag adoption if we saw fit past July 1st, just to make sure we capture some of these developments. Because given the fact, well, quite seriously, given the fact we're at the 1st of April, and there's typically a lot of conditions prior to adoption, without really being a hardship, people should know that they're not going to get adoption before July 1st if we want to capture this.
Yes, although I think Councillor Elliott's suggestion may be a better way to go, because we can just enter into an agreement to meet that requirement and then adopt the bylaw.
As of now, we will. Yeah, either way, I would hate to lose that kind of bubble that's coming through the system right now. At least I hope it's a bubble. Get back to normal one day. But it's not a bubble. I'm sorry. In any event, there's a lot of construction coming up that I think we would all like to capture in some form or other.
All right, Mayor Heights.
Yeah, I think we've got general consensus. I would like to hear back from Richard on the commercial buildings. And I think we have to stop thinking about what the cost is today, 1-2% more. Make your building 3% smaller and you save that. Our buildings are they're big, they're really
They're
big.
maxed out for the size
And that's the
each
best
lot.
way to
Yeah.
save money and to save energy is to just build a little smaller. So I would like to see us get to step 3 by January 1st, 2019. They have one season to get through, but not sort of through 2019. On the part 9, I mean, I'd like to go to step 3 right now, but I appreciate what I'm hearing about helping people make sure they're ready. And I'm hearing, I think, from everyone that part 3 residential buildings go to step 3 right away. That's what I heard.
I think the only difference with those two, just to chime in, the MUDs, being part 3, they're under full letters of assurance, so it's very easy for them to achieve part 3, whereas the single-family dwellings are just basically your homeowner and contractor. So,
I understand that,
Okay.
yeah.
Just to clarify, the MUDs have nothing to do with mud zone.
no,
They're multiple unit dwellings.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, not mixed use.
Mixing your acronyms.
Yeah.
What was your?
Yeah, I
It's a lot of
I was
money,
like, why
right?
is it so long?
They're changing too.
And then essentially, I think going forward, rezonings, we just write it into the zones between now and July 1st.
Councillor Elliott?
Someone mentioned phase 3 earlier, and I actually think graphically, we should always show phase 3 as 2020.
Yeah.
I think that we should show the aspirations of our community to not stop here, and that as 2020 comes around, that we will be looking to reach those goals then, so that people shouldn't get complacent at this level. They should already be thinking about what is coming next. So I think just as a alert to the building community.
And is the green building bylaw in this year's budget, is it not?
Okay.
The which?
Yes, there is money in this year's budget for greening the zone bylaw.
So it might have incentives or encouragements in there to actually move people towards step 4 or step 5.
Correct, yeah. If you're going to incentivize, you can go as high as you want.
Okay, so I guess I'll be looking for that within the green building bylaw.
that's the thing about tonight. Fixing that last one.
All right, well, I think there's some pretty good consensus around there. Does staff have enough information to proceed?
I think so, on a step code.
Okay.
We do.
Okay.
Maybe we should put it in a motion so it's just really clear.
Okay.
So the council directs staff to do phase 1 for parts 9 and phase 2 January 1st, 2019.
Instead of July 1st?
Instead of July 1st.
Yep.
And that part 3 residential be step 3 in phase 1. And that you're going to bring back options for the commercial.
Yes.
Good.
All right. Moved by Marion Keinsman, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those well, is there any further discussion? No. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So just going forward, we are planning to do sort of an open house later this month to allow people to drop in and see the bylaw, and so this information that we received today will be very useful to let people know what's coming. And then as Richard mentioned, we are planning on facilitating a few workshops between now and phase 1, so after the bylaw is adopted. Okay. So the rest is just a list really of administrative requirements or changes that we are proposing. And these relate to the fire suppression system, pre-application requirements, when permits are terminated, when permits can be extended and for how long. Permit issuance is defined, requirements for digital copies are included in the bylaw. Notification of change in ownership is also a requirement now or proposed. when the works can commence, administrative requirements for sanitary facilities, aligning building height with zoning bylaw and design drawings, ensuring that there's hazardous materials assessments before demolition, which is a requirement, but we're just making that explicit. What are the owner's responsibilities before the permit is issued, a requirement for a pre-occupancy meeting with the applicant, as well as showing the stormwater management plans on the site plans of building plans. So those are the main kind of changes that we're proposing. And they were outlined in the report in more detail. I just didn't want to go over all of those here.
Thank you for sparing us, yes. I have Councillor Pryor and Councillor Kent.
Well, it's not sparing us, it's actually kind of a nice read, it's well put together. A couple of the things in here that stuck out to me was the certified professional program.
We're gonna do that next, I think.
Are we going?
I have Councillor Kent and then Councillor
In
Elliott.
your pre-app requirements, can you just touch on that? I'm just trying to find the page here, what the changes are to that.
The application.
For that right now, if you have a number.
So it's proposed that if required, what we have now is projects that want to move to the building permit stage as soon as possible. So that everybody wants to get to that stage where they're able to apply for a building permit. And what we're proposing is that if there's a requirement for a development permit, a subdivision, or a servicing agreement, that those things be completed, substantially completed first before somebody can apply for a building permit. Because things change as you go through the design review phase, and so it often bounces the project back and forth if someone has made an application for a building permit too early. So it's just when those other land use type of approvals are required, that someone can't apply for a building permit before it's substantially completed.
Councillor Elliott.
In section 3.8, and this has to do with existing buildings, it says if an addition or alteration is made to an existing building, the entire building must be upgraded to a level consistent with this bylaw and the building code. So does that mean if someone's putting in, like I have a 1980 home and I'm putting in a secondary suite, would I have to upgrade my whole house?
No. Just the area that you're putting the renovation in. So if you're making an addition on your house, that addition would have to comply to the code, but we can't force you to bring your existing house up to
Okay.
the code.
It was the entire building piece that confused me. Because it says the entire building must be upgraded.
Yes. But it is in the section limited application to existing buildings.
It was just the use of the entire building, and I wasn't sure whether you were meaning the entire new part of the building or the entire building.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like that could use some clarification.
Yes.
Yep.
The building code does exempt existing buildings from having to be upgraded, so even in bylaw, if it had to meet code, the code exempts existing.
So yeah, perhaps though,
But
just
that wording is
for clarity,
confusing.
maybe there should be a additional sentence in brackets or
Yes.
something like that. We'll leave that in staff.
Thank you.
Mary.
There's a few things in here, and I get the intent of them, and I just worry that they become overly bureaucratic. So a pre-occupancy meeting, so you're meeting to have a meeting, and I just worry, I just want to make sure we're looking at that to make sure it really is providing efficiency and not just simply adding another meeting to.
We found that since we started the pre-occupancy meetings, that when the inspectors go to site, they could do a complete inspection and they will get either an occupancy or not based on the condition of the house. All the material that comes in paperwork-wise, we know is complete. So when the inspector goes out there, there's no waiting for paper to arrive on site or anything like that. It's more of a wasted inspection. So what we've done now is have the people come in, they have a checklist with their permit. they have all the information in, and if there's any information missing, we just make a list of it and give it to them, and then once they have it all, then we'll book their pre-occupancy, or their occupancy inspection. It's
I
just
just-
save the stuff.
Yeah, I just don't want to create bureaucracy for no reason.
We found it actually cut down complaints because people would call and say, well, you're here, why can't you just get the information when we send it in? But you know what, that doesn't work. We've been finding that it's actually more of a chase to try and get paperwork than it is to have the people that have applied for the permit do the job and supply us with the paperwork.
Do you think with the step code and raising everybody's bar, that we're going to have more proficiency within the construction field and maybe more efficiency on this side of things too?
You'll have more
Like
efficiency.
an unintended consequence of this?
I don't believe you will on the balance of information required now for an occupancy, and I believe it'll get better for the step code for all of their energy efficiency because they're going to have an EA managing it. But it's still going to be up to the applicant and owner to take care of all their other paperwork.
Thanks.
Councillor Kent.
We've discussed it a few times, and I was wondering if there's a way to include some wording in here about during the design phase, especially on larger buildings, like for instance, a BOSA building or the main, and we talked maybe about a threshold of just being able to be provided for council and for the ADP to be able to see 3D renderings, because I think the day of 2D drawings and renderings is kind of over and past us, and to be able to see it in 3D, and I don't think it's a substantial additional cost to developers to be able to bring that, and it really helps council make informed decisions to be able to see a model, an actual model of how those buildings are going to affect shading and space and all of that. And is there a way to word that into the document so that people are almost required to bring that forward?
We will work that into a different bylaw, the procedures bylaw.
Yeah.
This is just building
Okay.
code. So this all comes in after the
Right.
DP review.
I just didn't want to lose that on the.
Yes.
That is a
But
great
thank you.
idea though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, 2D renderings are pretty much passé. It doesn't really inform you that much, and it's not so difficult to make the 3D renderings anymore. Thanks.
Especially to show the safety, like you're
Yeah.
saying, yeah.
Especially on larger buildings, and I know, well, it's a future conversation, but we should try to figure a threshold for that as far as unit goes, so. Yeah, thank you, anyway.
Any other comments or questions on the administrative changes section?
Well, just to Pete's point there, I thought we did that already.
In a different, this is the building.
I know, but I mean, it's done, right? I just-
No, we still have to amend the bylaw.
Yeah, we bantered it, I think.
Council has passed the motion, and we are working on bringing that forward, but hasn't happened yet.
So stuff that we're gonna see like today and that aren't following that protocol?
No, not yet.
That's really too bad, especially when we start getting into height that we've never seen before.
Well, would it be fair to say that that change to our procedures bylaw is probably coming up in the near future?
Yes.
Great. All right, I think we're ready to move to the next section.
So the last point is the Certified Professional Program. And the program is accredited with the Architecture Institute of BC. It is something that we've looked at, and what we've determined is that it's something that we want to have a better understanding on and potentially some help with implementation of, and designing the program that would allow basically a much lesser level of oversight at building permit review than what we normally do now. So right now, we do all of the review at building permit stage before the building permit is issued. Sometimes we will go to a peer review if the applicants are proposing to use alternative solutions to the building code. And then when it gets to once the building permit is issued on those more complex buildings, everything is done basically by letters of assurance. So we're more hands-off at the inspection stage, and the engineers and architects are providing us with letters that yes, everything's going according to plan, but we're very much involved at the review stage. The certified professional program would change that in that we would be more hands-off at the review stage as well as the inspection stage. So it's something that we're looking at, but we're proposing that this be delayed till potentially the end of this year, and that we do an amendment at that point. We have some money in the budget, so the green building item that we have in the budget, I think would allow us, a small portion of that will allow us to talk to somebody or hire somebody that's done this before. A number of municipalities have gone through this in the Lower Mainland, to get a better handle on how do we implement it, because we'll have to design an exam. We'll have to determine how many people locally would be qualified. The district does have a role in determining who's the certified professional that we would trust, essentially. So yeah, basically what we're proposing is not to do this with this update, but to do a follow-up amendment.
Questions from council on that? I guess for me, one of the things that comes up with that one is, you know, in another field, you know, we kind of went for environmental review. The province sort of went with their, you know, third-party professional reliance model and all of that. And I'm just wondering, in this kind of scenario, is the scope fairly limited, or are we actually looking at replacing a lot of things that are done in-house by staff, you know, as directed by council? And so to me, I'd be concerned a little bit about that in terms of, you know, it's always different, you know, regardless of how professional you may be. If you're on a client kind of basis, there is always that risk if you're making some more subjective and nuanced judgment calls on things versus maybe more very straightforward, you know, it meets this number or it doesn't. And just trying to understand to what degree decisions fall into the very subjective category versus very, you know, objective category. Because for me, that would kind of determine how comfortable I am with that kind of model that got before us. But Councillor Rees.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the professional reliance issue that's kind of out in the wider field, and the perceived conflict in the minds of the public or some members of the public when a proponent hires the consultant. It's their consultant who is now giving the opinion that the regulatory authority is supposed to rely upon. And so when I looked at this, I didn't understand whether it's the proponent's architect or engineer or whether it's ours, just like we hire independent planners for some projects, for example. And so in effect, are we then just substantially just contracting out? Is that more or less what this is about, or?
No, this would be somebody working for the proponent, but it wouldn't be the same person as their architect. So it could be another, it's a third party essentially, but working for the proponent, and that's why the structured design of the program and who qualifies is very important, and our role in it. So it is very much a professional reliance program, but in which we have a greater role at the outset to determine who's eligible to do this.
So certainly funded by the proponent, I can understand that part of it, but would we select the person out of a list of potential candidates, or would the proponent select this person?
There would be a list of people who we have approved essentially as eligible to do this within the district.
But that would be then though at the decision of the applicant.
Yes.
From the list, because that's a key distinction, I think.
Yeah.
The AIBC needs to approve the list. Those that are approved by AIBC, Architectural Institute, then need to pass the test that we have yet to design. At that point, it's hands-off. We don't do anything, as far as I'm aware, review permits, we don't do inspections, and you don't want to. Of course, if it's hands-off, it's hands-off. You don't touch anything. If you go on site, you're essentially back into the business. So we review reports from the certified professional that come in on a monthly basis. The question that we haven't yet had answered for us is who's qualified to then review those reports. Some communities have hired their own certified professional to review the certified professional's reports coming in, which isn't really going to save. We're not sure that that's the way that we could, should, or need to go, but those are some of the things that we haven't figured out And how are they going to manage the audit process? How do you manage the disciplinary, or if they don't file, handling the removal of designation from the local list? All of those things that you need a fairly robust process in place to be able to, it's not just a matter of opening up the AIBC list, and there's a little bit of work for us to do on this.
And I'm just trying to get a sense, it says that other municipalities are already doing this in BC. I mean, is it anything common about these other municipalities? Are they very large municipalities or very small, or, you know?
They're large.
They're generally larger municipalities.
Okay.
The municipalities that I spoke with, they set up the CP program by bringing in a professional to manage the program because of the size of the city and the municipality and the amount of projects that they have, because their staff wasn't trained for the CP program.
Have any other questions on this? Sorry.
And Ted wanted to say something too.
Okay.
I know MIABC would love for us to get out of this. They'd love for us to get out of building inspection, period. But particularly in Part 3 buildings, they really think that the liability should be on the professionals who are hired by the building. The regulatory authority for the building code is the province, not the district. We have bylaws that make the connection between the building code and our infrastructure and stuff like that. And we need to be able to make sure, and that's how I understand the test, is simply to make sure, because our bylaws may be different than North Van and Vancouver, that whoever's doing the professional certification is knowledgeable enough in our particular bylaws, correct?
Yeah.
But I agree with Gary, it's like we should, as soon as we go on site, we take on that liability, we take on the responsibility, and we take on the risk. This is about taking away the liability. This isn't about, I see it differently than the professional certification that a lot of the discussion in the province, and that's more to do with forest industry and some of those bigger projects where it's actually working, and we said this in the meeting a couple months ago, it's actually working at the local government level. It's working in, generally speaking. That's not where the criticism of the professional reliance model. It's more in the bigger mining and forestry sectors that are the challenge, and not the local government. So I'd like to see us to get here sooner rather than later. I don't want to see us taking over and meddling in Part 3. I think it's a liability that municipalities don't want to take on. MIA would be really happy if we stopped messing with the Part 3 buildings. So I'd like to see us get there sooner rather than later. And I guess my challenge is I'm not really understanding how complicated a questionnaire or test we need to put forward to understand if, you know, someone knows enough about our bylaws or not. Like I don't understand how complicated that test. I don't understand why it would take a month to go, have you read our bylaws? Do you understand them? Excellent. You're taking on the responsibility, good. And then we just plan check at the end, period, or whatever we determine is that cutoff. I'm trying to understand why it would take a year to make a test.
Presently, right now.
That was a long-winded question for a question, I'm sorry.
I mean, right now, we're busy with sort of getting the step code and getting that process under our belt. So, meanwhile, I mean, what's the current wait time on them? It's 8 to 12 weeks. So, it's a resourcing issue, and if we want to get ourselves out of and deal with the liability issue, we need that robust CP policy or the provisions in the bylaw. Otherwise, we won't get rid of that liability. So, I mean, the test is likely going to be after something we'll run by MIA to make sure that they're happy that
I bet you they have a test already, like a blueprint test.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, I think the problem is that we just haven't had time to put to have multiple conversations with people who have done this, and then design a test. So it may not be a difficult task. It's just all this other stuff that we're working on
It's not just the test. It's not just the test as well. It's the structure around, well, when are we going to demand reports? How are we going to deal with reports that don't come in? There's a whole structure, a whole section in this bylaw that needs to be developed so we do get that liability protection. If we don't do that properly, we'll simply have spread the liability into a different area of the organisation. So it's just something.
I just also want to put your mind at rest that we do not go on a site. When we have a CRP project, the only time I will go to site is at the very beginning of the project, just to meet the general contractor, who's my contacts, who's the safety, and everything else. But other than that, it comes in as reports from the CRP. I do my plan review as the CP would do, and so it takes about 2 weeks to do a full plan review. And so far to date, every plan that we've done, we've basically given back and asked them to redo them because they're not to code. So that's what we're dealing with right now, and that's just to let you know, MIA do appreciate the fact that we do not go on site and that we leave everything up solely to the CRP. We have had some calls from insurance companies and on one site, and we have not gone on site. So MIA was very happy. We just gave them the CRP's name and number, and that was the end of the file. But just to let you know.
Councillor Craig.
Well, that makes it a little bit clearer, but so on the big jobs, like say what's going on Loggers Lane,
Can you be a little bit more
Yeah.
specific? Water, there's quite a few projects. You mean like downtown?
where all the
Seven
waterfront
Summits?
work is going.
Sirocco.
Sirocco.
No.
Oh.
And,
You're talking waterfront landing?
well, okay, waterfront, anywhere
Okay.
there's a big project on the water, how do we, so you don't go on the site, the plans come in, you plan check it, and then the reports come in to you and you read the reports. Yet, Gary, you're saying that when we want to go in to use this CP certification, we have to hire somebody that's done it before yet, I mean, we're doing it now, right?
No, I don't. That's one of the questions that I don't think we've had adequately answered. Is, I mean, one of the communities, they hired a structural engineer to run their CP program. We're not so sure you need to do that, but that's the work that we need to do, is figure out if we set up the system like this and we have these reports coming in from the CP that's looking after structural, mechanical and electrical engineers, what's the qualifications of that person that is, do they need, I'm not convinced they need to be a structural engineer, but I don't want to hire the wrong person.
Can't you make the development itself bring you those answers?
Well, those answers are supposed to come into the certified professionals report. It's just, how are those reports then handled? We want to make sure that that's done properly. And those are the questions that I don't think we have fully answered.
And you haven't had a chance to review the way other towns have done it yet.
Well, I say one of them's hired a structural engineer to run their program.
So we need that review.
Okay, I have Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Elliott, and Councillor Wace.
Thanks. I completely agree with Gary. I don't think we have the managerial controls in place yet to actually manage a program like this. I completely see the benefit of having, with the large amount of building and infrastructure that's going in right now, and the land use, we need oversight. We do need an integration from the district and the certified professional, because there's still going to be oversights, even if the certified professional is somebody that we recommend. There's still not going to be enough in town to actually know our bylaws, and it's not even just our bylaws. It's understanding, the layers of our land, the difference between estuary and building up top. There's so many complications with building, with flood construction, with debris flow hazards. We really do either need to, if we want to go to a certified professional, we need somebody in-house to review, so that it's not our building staff constantly reviewing the plans. So either we look at something that's in the budget for next year, so we keep out of it and have a certified professional of whatever sort, whether it be an engineer or whatever our staff feels would be a good integration, because those controls are the safety of the public. So it's integral to not just have somebody plant a professional designation, because as you know, even within professional designations, the quality can vary, and the amount of work. If they're taking on a lot of work, it's going to be difficult to control everything that goes on a large site. So I do think it's important to have somebody there in staff because we're already slammed. Either we keep it slow, which I also don't mind, or we hire somebody, if we want it sped up, hire somebody within staff that is paid for by building permits. And maybe those larger projects actually take a little bit more in a permit to pay for a third-party person within our staff to review the project.
Presently, the permits now pay for a third-party review of all the alternative solutions. So we send those out to an independent consultant to review them and bring us back a neutral answer of. And that's paid from the developer.
Would it be valuable to have that in-house?
You would have to hire a engineer or somebody in-house.
Yeah, that's what Gary was suggesting. We're not suggesting, but saying that that's how other people say. Sorry, Gary. Saying that other communities did it.
Yeah, well, and I would just say that, just to reiterate a little bit, clarify what I was trying to get at the beginning was, I think sometimes, there can be economies of scale on these types of things, but in other instances, there may not be because we're a smaller municipality and, maybe it is better to just have one person on the docket and they sort of coordinate, whatever else is going on. So, not to over complexify, if I may, the whole process. I think it merits examination, and I can see both sides of it, and I think what I'm hearing so far is that obviously we want to mitigate and reduce liability from the district's perspective, but we also don't want something that's administratively burdensome or cumbersome and maybe perhaps doesn't have good accountability. So moving along, Councillor Elliott.
Thanks. So I'm okay with the timeline proposed here because I think the priorities for me are the things that are in this year's budget around greening the building code, getting at least part of the zoning bylaw updated. Those sorts of things are more important to me than this piece. But I think what looking at a certified professional program does is is that we should be looking at all of our different types of customers and making sure that, if I'm a small business that wants to make some minor adjustments, to my premises, that those can go through quite quickly. It's not major changes for our small businesses. And then something like this, I would like us to have less of a, at least hands-on approach as we can, but I don't want to rush into anything until we know the implications on staffing and that sort of thing. But I do think it's an opportunity to look at all the different pathways that our customers are coming in on, from small do-it-yourself person working on their home to a small business that's trying to renovate their interior, so they only want to be closed for like 3 weeks and they want to be up and running again. What are our pathways for these different kinds of customers, and are we managing them all in the most efficient way possible? So, if it's coming back in early 2019, I'm okay with that, but I think it's really important that we do look at this in terms of, can we be more efficient? What are the economies of scale we can achieve, the size of our staff and the amount of work that we have? So, I'm okay with it.
Councillor Race and Councillor Pryor.
Thank you. So, and I'm okay with the timeline too, and so for similar reasons, but mainly just to make sure we get it right, because I get the point about liability, or trying to avoid liability, and I know it's not as simple as just sending somebody else out to do it. There can be other attachments, and so we do want to have a bit of a structure on it. And the other thing is that we really, as a municipal government, I think we have a vested interest in making sure that the buildings that are built in our town are good and up to that standard. And so I think we want to have a robust system for that, and so I'm fine with the time it takes to get it right. I'm still a little hung up in this professional reliance thing. As a former professional, I understand the qualifications of people and the fact that their professional bodies scrutinize standards and discipline and so forth. I think it's the public perception that can sometimes see a problem with this, and I think it's something the public wants to or should have faith in. And for me, as I try to think through the system, it comes down to I get the fact that these people, the CPs, would be qualified by the Architectural Institute and ourselves, and so we'd have a list of qualified people. It's the fact that the proponent picks them as opposed to us picking the person, because that can lead to one person always being used kind of thing. And so, if we could kind of get over that little hump, whether it's a rotation, you take the person at the top of the list regardless, or something like that, to get around the idea, the connection between the proponent and individuals who might be on that list. So it's more, to me, it's more of a public perception issue and the public having faith in it. But I think, that I'm not in a rush to do this. This could be quite significant, and I would like to see if we're going to do this to get it right. So happy with the timeline.
Thanks.
Yeah, when Councillor, go ahead, Tim. I'll let Jason share. When Councillor Ray said, sorry, when Councillor Ray said, as a former professional, I thought he was going to say, I understand why people aren't very confident in this.
I wouldn't say that.
I thought that's what he was going to, but anyway. So,
Way too smart for that.
just on what Councillor Elliott was saying, this was some of my concern, is that you have these small projects that come in that take a long time, because Richard's spending 2 weeks on something that there's other professionals that have signed off on it already. So I would like to understand, it's my perception, and maybe I'm wrong, that municipalities have slowly started to insinuate into these Part 3s over the years. And that all along we were never really supposed to be meddling in them. That they were big, professionals have to sign on it, engineers, architects, whoever has to do it. And that slowly municipalities have started to weed into this too much. And maybe that's just my perception of it. I would like to hear back from MIABC on what their view of what municipalities should do to separate themselves from this a little bit, particularly from a liability point of view, while still maintaining, of course, safety of the public is fundamental. But this is fundamentally something that the province has mandates, regulates. So I'd like to see this move forward quickly, because the distraction from these big Part 3s from Joe Blow business that wants to add a ventilation system to their kitchen gets pushed out 3, 4, 5 months down the road. And anyway, I'd like to see us move forward in this. I'd like to hear from MIABC in terms of their suggestions on how we get rid of the liability or minimize the liability while still ensuring that we have the scrutiny we need to make sure people are safe. And I'm sure they have all sorts of suggestions there.
Jesse and I were just in an MIA webinar this morning where they spoke about the risk of the Part 3 buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the municipalities are still supposed to do a plan review and then leave it up to the professionals once the permit's issued. So then they would just do their monitoring. They don't go on site, but they still do their monitoring. So you reduce the risk by doing your plan review, correcting any code infractions there. And then you also reduce the risk by not going on site. So they said as long as you're doing those 2 items, you should be fine. So.
And I just want to clarify that we do triage building permits, so the smaller stuff, the tenant improvements move along a lot faster, and they move to a different timeline than these big projects. These the big projects now that are taking a lot longer than they used to, because there's so many of them.
And they also all have alternative solutions, and they aren't built to code. But just to segue onto him, we do look at all the tenant improvements as they come in, and we try and get those out, because the small people are the most important people. They keep the community going. It's not the big developer that's coming in.
All right, well, sounds like we don't quite have,
Yes.
oh, Ted.
Hey, boy,
I'm
I'm
blind
invisible
spot today, sorry. Go ahead, Ted.
Well, I wish the timeline was before the end of my term, because you never know how things get lost in the dust. You know, the liability, the sooner we can reduce the liability, the better. And not for just, you know, it's not just for the big, huge developments. I mean, if a guy's building a little mixed-use building, and he has an opportunity to hire a professional to come in and look after all his or her engineering and environmental and all those aspects of their building, and speed it up so that he can bring a piece of paper into the district and say, I have done all this. My professional has said it's all done. And then the district will say, that's great. You're good to go. Instead of, well, we don't go on site, but we do a plan check and we do this, and then we try to do the smaller ones in our, you know, and I'm just thinking that there has to be you know, a way to just simplify it for everybody. So that, I mean, wouldn't it be nice to have someone bring in a paper to Richard so you can go, perfect. It's done. I don't have to do anything.
What is the liability now?
Where is the liability now? Well, the liability rests on the 5 firms that we have okayed to be plan checkers and look after the package. But we
I meant now.
So it relies on them. So the
Okay.
liability is on them. It's not on us. I mean, I'll be interested to see some comparisons to what other communities do. But I mean, that's, you know, to me, it's about the guy trying to get the project done that can follow all the rules by hiring people and eliminate 3 or 4 steps in the planning process or the building process. But I was hoping it would be done before the end of my term.
All right. Any other comments or questions?
Well, I mean, are we gonna get a little update on this? Do we get some feedback on it? You know,
Yeah, we can certainly do some research
I
on
know what
it.
MIA has to say, and
If they've got boilerplate documents, as the mayor suggests, then yeah, we can look at if there's a simple way of doing this.
yeah,
We appreciate the liability issue as well. It's just, it needs to be done properly so that that liability is in fact managed and not just, you know, diffuse or elsewhere. So, and my understanding is this really is for large projects. This, in the larger municipalities, this is really only for large projects that use the CP.
well,
There's an additional significant overhead to have another professional supervise all the professionals you've already hired. So I don't think you'll see the very small projects using the CP.
maybe not. But if it saves them a year.
All right. Well, I think we've gotten a range of viewpoints on this one. Yeah, if staff has the opportunity to look into this, and perhaps we can make time on another CDC agenda before Councillor Pryor retires. Or he can just decide not to retire. But,
Is retired.
anyhow, we'll look forward to receiving that.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Item number 3.
So, can we just go back to the process for this building bylaw? How does staff see that coming back to council for? Do you anticipate the whole bylaw coming back with some of these step changes?
Yes, I think the way we'll do it is, because we were going to do an open house, we could come back with a bylaw for first reading, and then have another discussion about it, and tweak, basically, if they need to be tweaked.
And so we would say that would be everything except for the certified professional section?
Yes.
Okay.
And when did you want to have another meeting for the answers that we found?
Well, I think the only one we're waiting for is the commercial.
Yeah.
Which you can just bring to first reading, and then
Yeah.
the plan is to go out to work the open houses after first reading.
Okay.
Once the bylaw is introduced.
The plan was that we're scheduling an open house this month. So that
Before
was
first
before the
reading.
first reading,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
For first reading.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody okay with that? Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
MAA had 55 claims against municipalities last year for building codes. Because of
Jonas, are you taking on the next item or shall we recess?
Jesse was here.
Jesse was here, yeah. Jesse has the
We're
item.
gonna recess for a couple minutes,
Okay.
for 5
Thank
minutes. All right, we're back in our Community Development Standing Committee meeting. Moving on to item number 3, which is our business license bylaw, zoning bylaw, fees and charges update, specifically on.
Do I have a conflict in this? I've got a canvas item.
No, I don't think so.
Not right now. We have an existing one, but is he affected by the bylaw?
It's a whole,
Your grandfather.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Okay.
He's a adult business.
Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor, Council. My name is Jessie Fletcher, planner with Community Planning. We're here today to introduce the 2018 housekeeping updates to the business license bylaw, zoning bylaw, and fees and charges bylaw, known collectively as the cannabis.
you guys are so clever.
No more business. Chuckle.
Cannabis Act is expected to be passed later this year. The provincial government has also provided information on how it will be regulated provincially. In the district has been regulating dispensaries since 2016. There are currently 3 active business licenses for dispensaries in town and 1 pending. Staff have identified some areas of land use regulation and some business license regulations for dispensaries that could be improved and updated. And the current business license bylaw was adopted in 2016 to clarify outdated regulations and make it relevant to today's business environment. Over the last year and a half of implementation, staff have noted several items that require amending. So the first slide is a long slide of all of the updates to the business license bylaw. Some highlights include that language will be changed throughout to align with federal regulations and to better align with the zoning bylaws. So all references to marijuana will be changed to cannabis to align with federal regulations. Cannabis facilities, so dispensaries will be required to obtain a LCLB license provincially. And existing dispensaries will be required to acquire one within a set time frame. There will be a requirement for nonprofits to acquire a business license, and this is to ensure that they meet the zoning. Cannabis-related nonprofits will not be eligible for a nonprofit business license. And childcare facilities that don't require a Vancouver Coastal Health approval will no longer require a business license. That's childcare facilities that care for 2 or fewer unrelated children. And finally, there will be an expiry for inactive licenses. So business licenses that aren't acted upon within a 6-month period will then expire to allow for changes in regulations to affect business licenses that aren't pursued. Any questions on the following?
I think we're good.
Okay. So a few items for the fees and charges bylaws. So the new items table are things that are not included in the fees and charges bylaw, but staff have fielded several inquiries regarding them. So ATMs, kennels, course, and peddler uses. Staff are proposing the inclusion of these uses at a standard fee of $130 for the year. Agriculture is also not listed in the current bylaw. A nominal fee of $1 for agriculture is recommended to encourage the use. Agriculture will exclude cannabis production facilities. A surcharge for late payment is recommended to cover the cost of staff time pursuing late payment for active business licenses. As of March 15th, 2018, $70,000 worth of 2018 business license fees had not yet been collected. The addition of a nominal fee for nonprofit societies of $1 permits these societies to obtain a business license. And our software requires a fee, so $1 is suggested.
Oh, and before we go further, Councillor Kane.
Just to that point, the surcharge for late payments, because we have active business licenses that are $70,000 in arrears. How do we more actively pursue that and keep and remedy that from happening?
Well, we send out invoices, like a notification every year when it's time to renew. And then it takes a while for us. Sometimes people just get back to us and tell us, the business is no longer operational, and so we shut down the account. Sometimes it takes more arm wrestling, and sometimes people just don't get back to us. So we're proposing that we include a fairly small fee to be as an incentive to make those payments on time. But it is staff consuming time to go out.
If they don't pay.
Yeah, I guess I think that would involve more time than for us to process new applications, because those businesses would probably come back with new applications. So we're just kind of phasing in this approach where there would be some penalty for not paying for your renewals.
As long as it's enough to make it work, right?
Yeah.
If it just seems, if it's not punitive enough, they just shrug it off and go, oh well.
Sorry.
We do have fines in place, so if somebody doesn't have a valid business license that's operating, we can issue a fine of $125 or $175, I can't remember, per day that they have not renewed. And we've actually used it in the past. We have done that as leverage to get people to renew their business licenses, especially in the businesses where, we're gathering stats, we want to monitor things like that.
Right.
The other half of the table are items to be deleted, and these are largely items that are captured in other fees, like our commercial or industrial fees, or they are obsolete, like the coin-operated coat hanger.
I want to know what that looked like.
I've Googled it and I haven't been able to find one.
What was the charge?
Not sure. It was coins.
So the table of increases proposes fee increases, which will keep the fees for film and theater consistent with our standard fees, which is $130. The decreases table, staff recommend reducing the childcare facility fee to a nominal fee of $1 to encourage more facilities. Food trucks currently are required to pay a fee of $300 for a business license, but food trucks do not require more staff time to process licenses than a bricks and mortar restaurant. Therefore, staff are recommending a reduction in the fee to align with standard fees. The district has received numerous complaints regarding the end of the prorated fees for business licenses following the adoption of the 2016 business license bylaw. The impact of this is that businesses that begin operation late in the year are still required to pay the full fee. Staff recommend returning to the previous system whereby applicants that apply for a business license after August 1st would see their fees prorated to 50% of the full fee. Any questions? And the zoning bylaw amendments. So the district regulates both marijuana dispensaries and medical marijuana production facilities. In anticipation of the legalization of recreational marijuana by way of the Cannabis Act, staff proposed to update the zoning bylaw to ensure consistency and to adjust regulations for locating marijuana production and dispensing facilities. Currently, medical marijuana production is permitted in any zone that permits light industrial use, and the use is currently occurring in the business park as well as in the downtown. Production in and around highly populated areas has been an issue in the district. Medical cannabis production is also an allowable use according to the agricultural Land Commission Act. The ALC suggests that municipalities use distancing requirements to regulate these facilities within the agricultural land reserve. The zoning bylaw does not currently permit medical marijuana production in zones that permit agriculture as a use. So staff are researching best practices to help determine what the appropriate distancing should be for medical marijuana production facilities. Staff are recommending that we limit commercial cannabis production to the rail yards or property that is specifically zoned for production use, eliminating it as a permitted use in the Sea to Sky Business Park and in the downtown. Staff suggests permitting medical marijuana production on ALC land subject to distancing requirements. And then staff recommend amending the conditions of use to include significant distancing requirements between, medical cannabis facilities and sensitive uses such as schools, residential areas, and other medical cannabis production facilities.
Okay, I think we have some comments on this. Councillor Chappelle and Mayor Heinzman.
Thanks. I am interested in why eliminating it as a permanent use in the business park in downtown. If it's zoned industrial, it should be able to grow cannabis or food. So why would we, what is the reasoning behind that?
The rationale is that it may not be the best and highest use for industrial lands and that it could be taken away from other industrial production.
It's actually high employment. So what's the difference between high employment and other industrial uses?
I think it competes with other users, and it's normally a type of operation that requires a lot of floor area. So it's floor area based. We definitely have heard complaints from people downtown about the businesses that are growing, and I think downtown, given the population density here, definitely light industrial is a different type of use. That, appropriate light industrial is different than it would be elsewhere because of the population density.
That's a different reasoning. Having it in a high density area and industrial use is a different reasoning than having it in our business park, which is supposed to be industrial use. So and the floor print and the amount of employment that it creates in our community is enormous. And it's high paying jobs. So none of this, I don't understand any of the reasoning that you said, except for the fact that maybe we have inappropriate zoning use in our residential areas. But if we're going to there's security, there's ventilation laws, all of those things are covered by other laws, other federal laws, including ventilation and smell.
So we're going on experience. What we've seen downtown specifically is that it does cause conflict with residential use, and
I don't disagree with you about downtown. I'm not arguing about downtown. I asked about the business park.
In the business park, we think that that it would potentially, if that use did grow in the business park, it would take away from the diversity of the business park. The size of the units are fairly small for the most part in the business park. We do have those kind of dirtier industrial uses there, and they're going to stay there. But I think once you start mixing marijuana production facilities with other more like lighter industrial uses, I think there could be a conflict there.
Would you allow pharmaceutical companies in the area?
Well, it depends what the use is.
I think the question might be, under our current zoning, would a pharmaceutical manufacturing facility be permitted in the business park?
It would be, yes.
Then I would say that marijuana growing should also be allowed because it's exactly the same thing. And it's the same, if it wasn't an employment sector, I might agree with you, but this is employing a good hunk of our community right now in a time when we don't have much other employment, so except for residential building. So I think that, and we don't really measure that either because of the fact that it's not legal yet. But I think once it's legal, we'll find that the amount of employment in our community is enormous. And I wouldn't want to remove uses or small business. They're basically small business operators right now. And that may be controlled once it becomes legal. The small operators may be eaten up by large operators. We don't know what's going to happen, but to say that they're not allowed in the business park, which was originally our industrial land, seems like it's a big overstep. Downtown I don't mind because downtown is going to be residential and mostly, but there is no other place for it except for in the business park.
Okay, Mayor Heinzman.
Along, a little bit along the lines of what Councillor Chappelle was saying, the complaints I hear are from the North Yard. The businesses there don't prefer that the medical marijuana grower wasn't there, and downtown. That's where I hear the complaints. I worry that allowing it just in the North Yards augments the land value there and makes it unaffordable for, I'm going to call it genuine industrial uses. I don't want to threaten that in the North Yards. I would rather see it in the business park than the North Yards. The other thing to take into account is that very possibly within the first year of the new regulations, what's going to complicate the new regulations is the two streams, the recreational stream and the medical stream. I wouldn't be surprised if the medical stream just goes away and it becomes one stream. And I really worry that we have very few ALR lands and that we are going to push it into the ALR lands and displace ideally genuine food production, which is what should be in the ALR. So I want to make sure we're cognizant of the fact that should all of a sudden cannabis be only one stream and not medical and recreational, but just recreational, it'll be regulated through other means, but we won't have this medical piece to it. It just complicates things. So I suspect that's where the federal government's going to go in the next year. What their year 2 implementation is going to be edibles, blah, 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 but also just getting rid of the medical stream, period. So just keep that in mind as if we're going to do things that's where it should. But I'd rather see it not in the North Yards, not in the downtown, but in the business park. It's inside a building, ventilation rules and stuff like that. It's more in tune with what a light industrial zoning is, in my mind. So I actually think it's more intuitive to a business park and not in the downtown.
So I put myself on the list for that one, and I think as well, I don't want to see it in the ALR. There are very few ALR spaces, and conceivably there are other places in the outlying areas of Squamish that eventually could have this kind of use that are not in the ALR. So I think that that's a spot to grow, but I also think for the time being that business park right now, I think is a good spot for that, and I kind of think of it as analogous to craft brewing, the way that's happening right now. And you can, I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of have a retail / production model where people can come and visit, and that is the kind of area that's most well suited to that kind of use rather than downtown or even on the other side of the tracks, I would venture to say, because that area is just not, the road's not up to standard, and there's a whole bunch of other things not good about that. So totally fine with taking it out of downtown as far as new stuff. Yeah, I think let's just nix the ALR part for now, and yeah, let's keep the ALR for food production.
Just want to clarify that the ALR proposal is just for medical production, and that's because ALC allows it as a use. So
but
we
if you
would
get rid of medical, ALC might not allow us use.
exactly. So non-medical wouldn't be permitted on the ALR lands.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if we could make the argument within our own community that it'd be different if we were in a place where we had a whole whack of ALR land around, and I don't know. I mean, is it staff's view that could be challenged as far as the medical?
I think we could deal with this through significant distancing requirements,
Okay.
which we are able to do. And we could identify a number of pieces that would be affected by this and
So
determine.
maybe the mayor has a suggestion on this as far as maybe we just sort of defer the decision on medical stuff. Maybe we just wait, I don't know, and not offer any special category. But I'm going to go back to the mayor just on that one. But I do have Councillor Race, Councillor Pryor, Councillor Alley.
Yeah, and Councillor Race, we did explore this a lot at the SLRD with regard to the ALR and the ALC, and essentially the ALC rules in this case, for medical marijuana trumps local bylaws essentially. But if everything is just recreationalized, it may or may not affect how the ALC perceives its role in allowing cannabis, period. And I have no idea about that. But yeah, we did look at this code at the SOIB, and we can't say no technically, unless we have distancing and some other parameters.
Okay. Councillor Race.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, subject to that, you know, it's when you're talking about a land use decision, it's hard for me to distinguish between medical and recreational. You know, it's sort of more or less the same thing. The product coming out is slightly different, obviously, but nevertheless, when you're talking land use, it's kind of the same type of production facility. And I think of, I'm not the expert in this, but I think of these things as being sort of somewhere in an enclosed building, like a greenhouse, for example, as opposed to in an open field. And so that's why, for me, it's certainly appropriate for it to be in some kind of an industrial area as opposed to out in the open field, taking up open field space and ending up with a whole pile of greenhouses on an open field. So that aside, we had a discussion, I think it was in the last term, about production facilities, and we decided, well, it's not going to happen downtown, and it shouldn't happen in certain areas, notwithstanding commercial and light industrial zoning and stuff like that. And I went away on holiday and came back, and that was taken out, and I don't know exactly what happened in that trip, but anyway.
Whatever kind of trip you want to go on.
No pun intended, but so we ended up with one downtown, and it obviously, as we all know, created conflicts. And so certainly I can see that it's not appropriate for downtown. There's parts of the business park where it might be appropriate. I mean, the business park started off as the industrial park, and then long ago has gotten into business/retail components, and it's not just an industrial park as we now know. And so there's parts of that, and now we have the mud zones, which are right there, which have residential components to them. And so I can see some parts of the business park where it might be appropriate, and some parts where it might not be. And as a general statement, maybe the southern part may be more appropriate than some of the northern parts, for example, but I'll let staff ponder that idea, that we wouldn't necessarily have to open up the whole business park. We could consider portions of it. And the north yards, and I'm not sure what the conflict issue is there. There are other parts of the municipality, such as protected areas of the Cheekeye fan or around the airport, those types of lands, which also one day might become more appropriate for this. So I generally agree with that. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that.
Excuse me, am I allowed to comment on anything? Oh yeah. We'll get you on the list for questions. We have just one more round around the council table. Got Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess what Councillor Race was talking about, their properties like around the airport may be included in this. Is there someone planning something in the north yards? I mean, staff is aiming everything to the north yards. Is there a plan for something there? And my understanding of the changes that are coming, I see changes coming a lot different than what I see here. And like in Victoria, there's greenhouses going in that are 5 acres greenhouses. We see all this big, huge growth things coming. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to last in the little grow-ups. And Councillor Race, when you went away that time, that just goes to show you what we can get done without you.
Yeah, to throw that in.
Councillor Elliott.
I think for me, I know that that Delta is bringing a recommendation to UBCM about not having marijuana production in the ALR, and I think there'll be more communities that are moving in that direction. So I think we do need to use distancing requirements widely here. I think for sure the production piece doesn't belong downtown, and I think we're moving towards more of a mass production model for this. And so I actually don't think it ideally fits in the business park, unless we limit it a little bit by size, because I think people are going to want to create massive grow operations, but I certainly can see a place where someone wants to be more of a craft producer and take up a smaller space like our breweries have and have a bit of a retail component. So I think if there's a way to limit the space for growing in the business park, I'd be okay with that. But what I don't want to see is like that, you know, some of those huge empty lots all going towards this use. I think that would limit the variety and the types of businesses that we could set up in there over time. I think that's a use that's more towards the airport, that kind of thing, where there's bigger pieces of land available. Maybe it could go next to carbon engineering's plant that they proposed it. So I think, so I'm okay with what's proposed, although I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility in the business park in terms of the size of the operation. I wouldn't want to see a huge 2-hectare warehouse, but if someone wants to have a specialty grow up and a small retail frontage, I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, we license alcohol, we're now going to be licensing this. And so I'm not sure the rules should be too different that way.
Okay. Councillor Chappelle, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Thanks. Significant difference. Can you describe the significant distancing requirements? I'm not sure I understand this either.
So the Agricultural Land Commission does suggest different kinds of distancing requirements as we do with dispensaries in a similar vein. So for example, some municipalities have gone and regulated that marijuana production facilities cannot be located closer to than 1,000 meters from another marijuana production facility, or cannot be within a certain distance of a school.
Do we have the same regulations for alcohol?
We do not have the same regulations for alcohol.
So I would say that I think we treat cannabis the same way that we treat alcohol in all of our bylaws. It's the exact, and for production, you know, I just don't see that we have the land to have massive acres of marijuana production. Currently, it's all small farm-like grow-ups that are employment places, and Business Park is the only place to have this. I like the idea of having small shops, you know, Karen Elliott said, and Karen Elliott is in town square, Karen Elliott. Yeah, I don't mind that either, but I just don't see that we have land that we're gonna get the knockdown, huge grow-ups that other towns might see that have a different land base. And if there's a place that can utilize energy or resources, I just think limiting employment right now is a really bad idea in our district, and it brings significant investment into town. And what's going to happen is, or what may happen is that we end up with shortages in the first little bit. So it will create. It may drop for a bit when people are unsure, but in the future, the shortages of the crop, as it becomes more, as you know, whether it's recreational or pharmaceutical, it may mean that if we have bylaws that allow, like we do, production of alcohol in our business park, I don't really understand why we restrict the one place that it actually creates a large amount of employment.
If I may, the reason why we're treating it differently than we do alcohol production is because we don't have that much experience with recreational mainstream cannabis production. And I think so we're trying to take a bit more of a precautionary approach. Doesn't mean that we, you know, in a year or two, come back and change the whole thing on its head. But I think we can definitely work with putting some limits on within the business park. And we could have a very detailed analysis of the ALR lands and, you know, kind of adjust on the the distancing requirements to see what the implications are.
So can I just follow up on that? I like going the other way. I like opening things up and not imagining all the problems and then trying to restrict them before they happen, but having more lenient zoning regulations, seeing if things go well, and if they don't go well, then placing bylaws on the parts that don't go well, instead of doing the other thing and restricting it so we don't get any employment, no investment, the investment goes to other towns, and we end up with no investment in our community. We need investment in our community right now, and we need jobs. And this could be, right now, that little hub there is becoming like a pleasure district. Maybe Councilor Riggs just doesn't want a giant marijuana leaf on the top of the 3-story sign in the business park. But it's, I'd actually be happy to put a motion forward to actually take the business park out of there. I don't mind the downtown. I definitely agree with you about areas that are strictly residential. But that area, if it grows residential or commercial or however it grows, it has to be open to employment. And this is going to probably be a significant employer in our district. Regardless of what people think about it, and the technology is also amazing. So I'm also in agreement with the other councillors that we need to restrict it from AL Island.
Okay, so I'll remind you about your motion after. But let's go to the audience first. Person in a jean jacket, if you could come to the podium.
Hi, I'm Frankie. We're at 37861 3rd Avenue, and we've been building for the last 3 years and spent a lot of money on our facility. And how would this impact us at this time? Because we've been working with the building department, with engineers, architects, and moving towards employing a lot of people there. And this just doesn't work for us, what you're proposing.
Is staff familiar with this proposal?
Yes, so any business that is operating legally with respect to our land use provisions would continue to be able to operate until it shuts down for 6 months or longer. So it's essentially grandfathered in.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect you unless you close down for 6 months.
Okay, Eric?
Thank you, Councillor Blackman-Wolf. Speaking on my own behalf, I wanted to make a note on the reference to the rail yards. I have been working with 3 companies, wood manufacturing companies. 2 are out-of-town companies, 1 is already here. We're trying to make things work at the rail yards. And this a proposal to allow or facilitate marijuana grow ops in the rail yards would be unwelcome. Unwelcome competition. The number of buildings and the options available for an investor to come in and set up a factory in Squamish are small. And we have already had experience with the marijuana grow op in the rail yards, and it's been an issue of controversy. I would suspect, I won't speak on their behalf, that this would be unwelcome to the current tenants in the rail yards. So we have in Squamish really severe constraints for manufacturing and what I would call medium industrial. And this would only add to those constraints. Secondly, the Cheekeye fan in the airport vicinity has also been referred to, and I have a lot of ongoing activity up there on behalf of the Forestry Association. We need to keep in mind that we have a memorandum of understanding between the forest industry and the district to work out a forestry land strategy. Just to remind of that, because we have been approached by marijuana grow op people to work with us. We're not close to entertaining such a thing. We have a lot of work to do to solve our land use issues in the Cheekeye land with respect to forest industry use, new uses. And so I just wanted to pass on those thoughts. Please proceed cautiously, and I really will look forward to the opportunity of a public hearing on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. All right, yeah, some good points there. Mayor Hanson.
Thanks, Eric. I completely agree with regard to the north yards. I think we need to, it would just actually increase land values to the point where it wouldn't be affordable for those types of industries to work there. So I'd like to see it taken out of the north yards and just in the business park. Considering grandfathered pieces, absolutely. I would like to understand, and I actually don't think we should go there yet, and maybe it's just a one-off basis that people come and ask for a rezoning, but how we may, if it's best just to say mute on either resource zone lands or stuff in the Cheekeye fan, and just stay mute. And if someone wants to come and put one up there, they work with the Forestry Society and they come in with a specific zoning application to that effect. Is that the best route to take on that?
I think so at the moment, yes, particularly because of the other issue on the fan right now is the hazard issue, and a lot of this type of activity would be in the building. So I think it's best to leave that area alone at this time until we have a bigger plan for that area.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. And it was just actually through the chair to Councillor Chappelle's point about trying it out, and if it doesn't work, make some changes. And the problem with zoning is when you zone something and it goes in there, you're stuck with it, just like we are in the downtown. It's grandfathered. So that to me is just absolutely 180 degrees the wrong way to go. And I think what we're trying to do now is to prevent making mistakes like that and considering other areas.
So, does anybody else want to speak? We have been focusing topics specifically just right now on the zoning of production. So I want to kind of keep them parceled out because they're sort of three separate. Does anybody else have anything else to say on the zoning for production?
Well, I kind of agree with Patty about the north yards. And, you know, Eric's point about trying to get manufacturing going there. We all want manufacturing there. And so I think we should really focus on keeping that manufacturing and assist in any way we can.
Okay, and I'll just add my 2 cents about the mud zone, and by that I mean the multiple unit dwelling, mixed use.
Mixed use,
Mixed
not
use. See, there we go. The zoning in the north yards that we've recently put in, let's put it that way. I'm actually not as concerned about co-location, like if there was a production close to those residential units, I think that, to me, that's actually less of a problem, and it may actually be a more likely spot for it to go in, because it's sort of back from the highway near the tracks, the land price will be a bit lower, but, you know, it's pretty clear for the context that people, when they're moving into there, they're moving into kind of a different vibe, so I just want to put that out there, and I think perhaps Councillor Chappelle might have a motion to bring forward that encapsulates everything that we've heard as far as...
I'd like to put a motion forward that we remove the rail yards as a production, for production use and permitting, and basically reverse the rail yards in the Cheekeye Business Park there. So limit commercial cannabis production to the Cheekeye Business Park, or a property specifically zoned for production use, eliminate it as a permitted use in the rail yards and the downtown.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Pryor. Do we have discussion? Councillor Pryor. And Councillor.
Well, maybe, you know, the distances, maybe the distances can be used in the north yards to restrict kind of area for growth in cannabis, so that it's not, you know, it's not just all 150 warehouses full of growing, which I just can't see that happening. But, you know, you have a thing up there about distance requirements for incompatible uses. I mean, you could just select an area in the business park.
Okay, I have Councillor Elliott and then Mayor Heinzman.
I certainly understand the intent of this motion, but I can't support it because I think there needs to be some rules and regulations around size and positioning within the business park, or else we're going to end up with the same conflict issues that we've got with downtown. We can't deny that there are now residents to the north and to the south of the business park, so we just need to be mindful of that. So I would personally would like to see a more nuanced approach to the business park rather than just saying it's permanent. So I won't explain so much.
Okay.
Wasn't gonna go out and, like you say, I wasn't gonna support it, but I wanted to understand if there was a more nuanced approach that we could take, or if we want to take it in the business park.
We could certainly explore adding size limitations in the business park to the use.
Okay, so we're hearing that one option was the size of the premises. One option mentioned by Councillor Pryor was the separation distance, kind of radius.
Timing issue. So, I mean, I understand we want to particularly get the cannabis regulations in there prior to federal government, probably August 1st-ish legislation coming forward. Do we have time to massage this a little bit in the meantime, do you think?
I also wonder too is, would we not be able to maybe not put it in the schedule for permitted uses and just have it come up as a rezoning?
That's another option.
Like, could we not do that? And then maybe at that time that would be a more appropriate. I mean, obviously some applicants may be deterred by that process, but we may want to do that, and maybe I think it sounds like we're all in agreement that in some form or another the business park or parts of it might be appropriate. We all seem to agree that downtown is not appropriate anymore for further expansion, and that the rail yards we don't want to touch right now. So if we could come up with some, because I'm thinking about the expediency as well, and I'm concerned that if we don't do that and line that up, that we might have more wrinkles.
Yeah, so follow up on that. Is it possible to perhaps, is it in the OCP level, we would allow it within the business park within the OCP, and then a rezoning application would have to come forward to allow it in the zone? Could we do something like that? So that these are one-offs and we can go, no, that's way too close to Karen and Peter's house.
It certainly can be done in the OCP at a future date.
Yeah, not this one.
I think we have a little bit of time. It's certainly a project that we've started work on. So I think we have time for another committee meeting before we go to bylaw. And I think if council wants to give an indication that this use is acceptable in a certain area, but put some real big restrictions so that it essentially forces people into applying for zoning, I think that's another way of doing it. So maybe putting a really small size on the use would be one way of doing it as well.
Councillor,
I think we're worrying about something that is a highly sophisticated industry, and because it was illegal, it was an industry that was stinky, unregulated, and didn't have security. It's changed, it's going to change. It's going to be it's going to be an agricultural use, it's going to be grown upside down, it's not going to be as smelly, and it's going to be, I can't emphasize how much employment it's going to create. And that the districts and the areas in BC, because this is a product that BC grows well, once it's opened up, it's going to be a product that's going to be internationally shipped. It's going to be, because of other areas opening up, legalization. And that the things that we're worrying about can all be regulated through bylaws, not through zoning. I totally disagree with Councillor Ray saying that zoning that can't be opened up. Zoning is not going to be the problem. What's going to be a problem is complaints about the industry not adhering to the bylaws. So there are bylaws about smell, there's bylaws about noise, there's bylaws about everything that we worry about. Now we're taking one industry out of all the industries that we have and trying to attach regulations that aren't actually a problem. So, I totally agree with land costs and the rail yards issue. That is something that's tangible, that you're changing land use and it's going to be companies that come in and they're going to be investing a lot of money. And for that reason, it should be opened up, not shut down in one area. And then you can look at the uses, see how much is coming in, and then you can say, do we need more noise bylaws? Is smell a problem? But I really think that we have this one area that's going to be craft everything. There's not enough land that it's going to take over the entire business park, and there's already businesses in there. And to over-regulate it is going to actually it's going to be at a deficit for a lot of people that are in that industry in our community. And there's a lot of people, I've met a lot of people moving to the community because of the industry. So it is an interesting new time, but it's no different than prohibition of alcohol moving to alcohol. And now it's government regulated, it takes in a lot of taxes, and alcohol has become, like craft alcohol is a big business in Squamish and attracts people to Squamish. And it's changed our business park as well. So I just don't want to follow the same prohibitive measures that's going to prevent an industry that might fit really well in Squamish from coming in. Who knows, we may not get no applications, but to force one industry into rezoning, that's a legal industry into rezonings all the time, and not allow them to have land use, even though you have alcohol as a regulated land use right next to schools, it makes no sense to me.
Okay, Councillor Race, Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks. Not supporting the motion largely for the reasons given by others. Just a blanket opening up of the business park I don't think is the way to proceed. And I would look at more site-specific or area-specific regulation, as well as perhaps size, to keep it sort of in the context of the business park, which is a lot of relatively small businesses. There's still some large vacant pieces of land there where it may be appropriate. That can be a rezoning, but just to open it up in a blanket base, I'm not in agreement with. The rail yards I actually thought was maybe not a bad spot for them. The southern part of the rail yards, I'm not sure the province is going in that direction anyway. They sort of seem to have it more associated with the port. So we're talking about the northern part of the rail yards, and as I said earlier, I'm not sure what the conflict is between existing users and a proposed business like this. If it's just purely a matter of price, that's difficult to regulate because I think the market will dictate. But if there is some inherent, something coming out of that type of business or impact of that particular type of business, that's something we can look at. But I'm not aware of it. So I'm kind of open on that particular one. But the business park, I think, particularly should be regulated. As I say, it's not an industrial park anymore. It's a business park. And there may be some uses that it is not compatible with, just as we regulate other businesses that might not be compatible in there. So I will not support the motion.
Councillor Pryor, is it on the motion? Yeah, okay, so we'll just finish off on the motion, and I think we're going to go for a vote and then continue on.
I'm glad that staff is going to come back to us with some new ideas on this, but I think Councillor Chappelle has a real point when we look at grow-ops as a business. I mean, gee, maybe we might get 30 of them each employing 25 people paying good wages. I mean, if we were talking about a computer manufacturing company that all of a sudden showed up and all these computer manufacturing companies come in, we wouldn't say, oh, well, let's not allow any more of those, we've got enough of them. So I think, I'm glad we're looking at it again. I think it can be resolved by picking an area in the business park where they can grow. I don't believe they're going to take over. I think that large grow-ops are going to eventually put all these little ones out of business. But I think we should be going with the flow, and if it's producing jobs, good paying jobs, and people are setting up in 3,000 square foot warehouses, go for it.
So I'll just finish off on the motion. I'm going to support the motion. I think Councillor Chappelle makes a good point in the fact that we do regulate already a lot of the things that are potentially negatives in terms of smell and noise and all of that. So particularly for the business park. I don't see why we shouldn't just open this up for a new business. And, you know, land costs are what they are. I don't think we'll see a single-story giant production facility. I mean, I think the land's probably still even too expensive for that at this point. So I think it would be more of a craft style, or who knows, maybe second floor grow up, that kind of thing. So I'll support it. But if there's no other comments on the motion, I think we should vote on the motion and continue on. So.
But staff's still bringing it back to us.
Well, we'll get to that. But this is just Councillor Chappelle's motion about opening up just the business park and closing it off in downtown and the rail yards. So all those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Councillor Race, Councillor Elliott opposed, motion carries.
So next up is dispensaries. So there are two areas that will present challenges moving forward in terms of dispensaries. The North Yards neighborhood and Cheekeye Business Park are rapidly densifying and developing. Currently, our conditions of use limit dispensaries from 300 meters from the closest property line of a school and from another dispensary. For the tobacconist regulations, Brennan Park was included as a sensitive land use, so no tobacconists were permitted 300 meters to the buffer of Brennan Park. Staff put the Brennan Park buffer on to show that there could be potentially 3 dispensaries within the North Yards neighborhood in the Mud 1 zone, and the C10 zone, and within the I9 zone. Staff are suggesting amending the permitted uses in this neighborhood to restrict dispensaries in the I9, Mud 1, and C10 zones.
Sorry, can you say that again, Jesse?
Sorry, so if Brennan Park is included as a sensitive land use and the 300-meter buffer is put on, in theory, there could...
300 meters from the property line.
From the property line.
So how does this bubble work?
The bubble works is from the middle of the site and then measures out 300 meters from the property line outwards. So the buffer is just sort of theoretical, but it was measured from the exterior property line 300 meters out, so it doesn't quite hit any of those areas.
Do you want to
So,
discussion on
I think, well, we're just talking about the buffers, right?
The buffers
On
for
all of
the...
the dispensaries, so let's get through all of that and then we'll have
There's 2 areas.
round table on the dispensaries.
Staff are also seeking community feedback on whether or not more regulation should be in place for dispensaries in the downtown and Valley Cliff area. The above map shows schools with 300-meter buffers in all areas, which allow retail stores, so the red and purple parcels. Staff note that because there are 2 existing dispensaries downtown, no other dispensaries will be permitted in the downtown area. However, some concerns include if the Waldorf School was to relocate in the Valley Cliff neighborhood, a dispensary would be permitted in Valley Cliff, and then dispensaries will be permitted in the Scott Crescent and on the ocean front, and staff are...
Oh, sorry, I just have a question on that. I thought that under our current bylaw that independent schools were not considered at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So with that not, like, currently, before any changes, isn't it the case that a dispensary could be in place near the Waldorf School?
No, no, the school definition would include,
It does?
yeah,
Oh, I misread that, I'm sorry. Continue.
the Waldorf School and the Montessori School would be included as
Okay.
part of the school system.
The school definition does require some massaging, however. It's
Yep.
unclear.
Okay. Oh boy.
I think I was on the list from before.
All right. Mayor Heinzman.
Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this one. I understand why we put buffers in before. I think as it becomes legalized, they should be treated like the same as somewhere where you're dispensing or drinking alcohol. And so I'm trying to understand that in the context of these rules, and that there was, I think the report said up to 500 meters now. You look at the, if you can go back to the previous slide, the buffer from Brennan Park, we just had a conversation about putting in the business park, and if we actually did from the boundary of Brennan Park property, basically we would allow anything in the business park. And it's quite a distance, certainly as a crow flies it's not a distance, but if you actually want to get there either walking or driving or riding your bike, it's actually quite a distance. So I'm not sure these blanket buffers really work anymore. And I would like to, I almost think there should just be exclusion zones, like not on Cleveland, but not necessarily get into the buffering piece too much. And I'm open to suggestions on this, but I do find it a little ironic or hypocritical to deal with alcohol in a completely different context of marijuana dispensing. And that if a beer and wine store is, you know, across the street from Athlone School, why wouldn't we allow something that's legal, like a medical, like a dispensary, a cannabis shop, to be there too? I'm having trouble delineating those two things.
Okay, so we're...
On a philosophical level, I mean, maybe there's other reasons you might want to do that.
And maybe I think it might be appropriate if we just kind of go around the table and council can kind of give their perspectives where they're going from, and then sort of maybe that might better allow staff to coalesce something.
And I have one more question, Heather.
Yes.
This is my original. So if you're putting, if you want to go and put a bar somewhere, you have to go get a local referendum vote. So that's just for consumption, not for sales, correct?
That's correct-ish. So currently, as far as alcohol goes, it's provincially regulated, and the applicants have to jump through for liquor sales, especially in a liquor store. They have to jump through a large number of provincial hoops. And as a liquor store in our zoning bylaw is not allowed under any zone. Every one of them comes through for a rezoning and has separate consideration. So you'll remember the one downtown here.
That's right.
The one in the City Sky Hotel was already there, and it was under an old zoning bylaw, an old regulation. But now,
you have to have spot zoning for a
spot zone. But I don't know if it's a hotel with a beer and wine store as an accessory. I'm not sure how. I think that goes through a different kind of approval process than a pub. So it's a different kind of a situation.
I guess my message, I think we should make sure we're aligning those things so that we're not hypocritical in how we do it.
So I'm going to put myself on the list here and just say that, in fact, I actually think that as far as dispensaries are concerned, and even in terms of alcohol sales, but we're not talking about that right now, but as far as dispensaries, I think we should do away with the buffer zones. And in fact, if you think about it from the terms of impaired driving and things of that nature, like, I think that there does need to be, you know, availability in the way that neighborhoods are served, and I think that's actually a good thing. And you know, once it's normalized and there is actually a process in place, it is adults only to go in and all of that, then I think to me that's the most important thing, is that we have, you know, the enforcement in place and all of that. But I think we can do it. So I'm in favor of eliminating that restriction. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Rice, Councillor Schwab.
Under the new regulations coming down, is the provincial government, I mean, if we have to rezone each liquor store that comes, that's done under provincial.
It's still, the zoning aspect is still up to council.
It's still up to council, but the requirement for a zoning is provincial?
No, it's not.
To issue the license, they have to have.
Yeah, sorry, I was misunderstood. We could put it in a zone.
Well, it's interesting because I have two feelings on this. So, one, if you know, when the vaping shop went in next to the high school, a lot of people really let us know that that was not cool for them. They didn't really want that use there. And I think if a liquor store applied to go there as well, we would hear the same thing. Part of the reason we put the buffers in is so that we weren't disallowing it in our zoning. We actually wanted to create space for dispensaries before the new regulations came in, but within reason. So one way to go is actually now to not allow it and then just to spot zone, leave that to the discretion of council as they come along. The buffers, I think for me, they play a transitionary role. I think for many in our community, they're ready to see dispensaries wherever and get used to them. I think for other people, they're going to be a challenge for a little while until it becomes like liquor, like an acceptable thing. You know, you stop off, you get your groceries, you get your cannabis, you get your bottle of wine, and you go home.
Have a good weekend.
You're set for the weekend. But I don't think that all of our community is all the way there. And I think that leaving the buffers in is a way to say that we are open to this use. And it provides space for businesses to set up, but it also allows a transition for our community to get used to seeing them, to be comfortable using them, and then, you know, maybe a year after the federal regulations come into play, we let them go and come up with a different way of doing it. So, you know, I do think that this will become commonplace. It will be, you know, people won't be really upset with it in a few years, but I think there's a bit of a barrier for people in the short term. So, and if we do keep the barriers, we got to remember there's a school going in Skyridge in 2019. Or if we keep the buffer zones, the school, the Montessori school get there. 2019. So I can see their use in the short term, maybe not in the long term. But I think if we opened it up completely in the short term, I think members of our community would struggle with that. Not everyone, but.
And for those, just ask for everybody who's supporting the continuance of that, do you support the 300 or the 500 or?
Well, my question was, why are we moving to 500? I thought 300 was working.
Yes, so the reason why we're suggesting that we should take another look at the distancing requirements is that, one, we do get a lot of inquiries about dispensaries. And at the moment, they seem to cause anxiety in the neighborhoods that they go into, especially the people that live immediately adjacent or that frequently travel in front of them with their kids. And it's just a crude tool to regulate the number of dispensaries in general in Squamish. I think we would want to regulate the number of liquor stores that we have in Squamish, and I think it's just another way of doing the same thing. So we've identified other areas where dispensaries could go into, which is, you know, the business park, and it is a retail use. And in the business park, there's general understanding that retail is not meant for the business park unless it's maybe in the mud zone. But it's just a crude tool.
So I think for me, in the short term, these make sense because I think we do need to provide time for our community to adopt this new use and get to know it and understand it and not get really anxious about it. And one of the ways we do that is by taking a step-by-step approach to it. And I don't think this is the way to go long term, but I think right now it still makes sense. I'm not totally convinced of expanding to the 500. I think 300 is working, recognizing that one could go across the street from me, but I'm okay with that. For my neighborhood.
Okay, we have Councillor Ray Chappelle, Pryor and Kent.
Thank you. And I would just, at this point, leave it as is. I would leave the buffers around the school and the size that they presently are. And I think I agree with Councillor Elliott. It's more for neighborhood sensibilities and just nervousness of parents for a while, and maybe one day that will change. I think, and I don't really know, but I mean the province, I do know that the province goes through extensive criteria for liquor stores and liquor outlets for a whole variety of reasons, and I got involved with them over time. But I mean, we're trying to keep out organized crime and people with criminal tendencies and all kinds of things like that out of the liquor business. They may apply that to the medical marijuana business, or not the medical marijuana business, but marijuana dispensary business. That's up to the province. And ours is land use, and I have difficulty distinguishing a little store that sells marijuana from a little store that sells apples. And so apart from the school issue, I think they can just go anywhere. And I think we probably will see a whole proliferation of them, and the market will take over, and some of them will make it, and some of them won't. And there will be a level that can be sustained in the community, and beyond that, people just won't be able to make a go of it. So it'll be no different than any other business. But I think there's going to be a transition. We haven't really seen the whole rollout of this thing yet, so I would just be inclined at this point to leave it as is.
Councillor Stahl.
Thanks. I'm in favor of removing the buffer zones for, this is small business right now, and the province is going to regulate it, and I'm sure UBCM motion will also have to do with this. So as Councillor Ray says, some will open, some will shut, and after it's all regulated, it'll all sort of wash out. But, you know, we act like we have a ton of commercial space. We have no commercial space. We have limited places for people to actually open businesses at all. And I think trying to find a place for a business is difficult. And when you put buffer zones on, it basically knocks out all the commercial in Squamish. So you're basically saying the same thing, that we can have dispensary, or we can have grow ops, but we can't have small businesses actually running dispensaries and distributing product. It's all regulated. Minors aren't allowed into dispensaries. So it's the same as a liquor store. You're controlling the product. And, you know, I just imagine this conversation being in like the 1920s, where this one substance has a stigma, but all the rest of the substances don't really have much stigma. And I think that this is going to be just the start of drug legalization, and that we're going to be dealing with, you know, the more prohibition comes off of these substances, and we go to a more regulated and informed discussion about substances, we're going to have less regulations controlling these things and more resources for things like mental health and substance abuse and everything else. But when we still have conversations that are like, well, it should be 300 feet or 500 feet, as if that's going to control things like addiction and problems with child access to drugs. Right now, it's free for all. So by actually allowing small business to control this substance, just like we do with alcohol, it's actually going to be better for the community. So I'm in favor, and especially the Brennan Park one. It seems ridiculous. We don't even have a commercial, we have no commercial land there, unless we were thinking about putting one in Brennan Park. That's a joke. I'm not putting one in Brennan Park. But going under that, having it past the highway, that seems just ridiculous.
Just on the Brennan Park item, the reason why we flagged it is because there is a high potential for commercial space to be in and around Brennan Park in the future, because it's a growing area.
We plug in them off the side of the roads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the same. Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I do think the rules are going to change in a little while. I'm okay keeping it the same. I do think that every neighborhood, like the neighborhood pub, should have a dispensary. So, I don't want to just open it up. You know, like all the shopping nodes. I mean, why not? And if it's close to a school, so be it. But we're not at the point now where we're going to start rewriting all this bylaw. Staff brought this idea into us, so if it's creating problems at the staff level, I'm okay going with you guys, because I think in a year from now we're all going to be revisiting it all anyway. So staying at 300 meters, I'm okay at that. But I remember neighborhood pubs before there was neighborhood pubs, and there was just big bars. And and they had this big bylaw, and everyone was afraid of all these neighborhood pubs coming in, didn't do anything, and then there was all those little liquor stores opening up everywhere. So I'm okay just either keeping it the same or going with staff, or talking it out altogether.
Okay. Councillor Pryor is ready to be convinced. Councillor Kent.
You know, we had a pretty fulsome conversation about these buffers in the first place leading up to this conversation, and I think I'd just like to see it stay as it is. And, despite federal regulations coming along, there is still a stigma to the marijuana in areas where kids are involved, and I think until that anxiety goes away, I prefer to see the buffers remain as they are. So that's my take.
All right, so I'm going to go to Mayor Heinzman, and I'm going to cut off the conversation here because I think we've all had a chance to speak.
Yeah, I'm okay with leaving the existing buffers as they currently stand. However, I do think probably within a year, that's when the federal government is going to start to look at oils and edibles and topicals and all that sort of stuff. That's not going to come in from a year from now. So I suspect this is an evolutionary process for sure. Interestingly, if you're opening a bar or a cold beer and wine store, you have to go through rezoning. We're not making we're not making cannabis dispensaries. See, I'm using the right terminology, cannabis dispensaries. Have to go through that. So I think this is an interim step, as Councillor Elliott said. So are you suggesting we say they're not allowed in that C10 mud and I-9, or they are allowed?
I think we're suggesting that it's probably inappropriate in the I-9 zone because it wouldn't have to be attached to any production facility. It would just be a retail facility, which it does right now allow retail. I think MUD 1 and C10 are one way or another.
And the I-9, you're allowed to have retail of a minimum size? Is there a minimum size? I can't remember.
There isn't a minimum size. It does restrict it to business parks serving retail, but does specifically disallow or does not allow alcohol stores, liquor stores.
Okay, if it doesn't allow alcohol, I'm okay, no. But I think the MUD and the C10 are fine. They wouldn't. And even, I mean, to be honest, on I-9, I don't mind having a dispensary in the business park, but I do think it should comply with, if there's a production facility and they want like a boutique kind of thing, that kind of thing we would absolutely be open to. But yeah, I'm okay with allowing those ones. The C1 up top likely is too close to the Manpom school, so I wouldn't.
It's outside of the 300-meter buffer.
Seriously?
What about the sports field?
Oh, is that on Amblecoff? Pardon me?
Spice Route.
District Mall, it's just south of the.
That's 300 meters away from the school.
There's Viking Ridge.
There's a mishmash in there, the kids.
Yeah.
Daycare.
The sports field? How do you didn't know about
80s code.
Well, no, and there would be a 300-meter buffer from, and I think this is where we kind of ironed this out, is that it's not, and we did it, I think, for the dispensary up in the Spectacle Building, it's not property line to property line, because some properties are really big. It's dispensary to school, or a school
The
property.
way the bylaw is written, it's still property line.
On,
property
I thought
line.
it was only property line on the school, oh, we did a
We did a variance.
variance, yeah. So I think we should change, and I think the intention was that, if there's a big property, it's in a mall, and it's at the far end of the mall, and it's easily 300 meters away from a school, but the actual property, is 300 meters away from the dispensary, we have to be intuitive about these things. We can't be kind of obtuse about them.
All right, so just before we get around to getting the vote in, just because this I-9 thing came up, I actually think, it's on the other side of the highway. And I'm not even concerned if that's the one place that somebody could put a cannabis superstore, then put one in. If they're really going to outcompete the other businesses for space there, then I don't know. I'm not too fussy with that. So, and I see that maybe some others aren't either. So, I think maybe what we'll do first is I'll entertain motions specifically around the 300-meter buffer zone. If somebody wants to move a motion to maintain the 300 and then add a 300 at Brennan Park from the center of the property as illustrated here. Is that, but I'll leave it open because I'm not moving that motion, so that's Councillor Elliott.
I just have a question. Given that Waldorf's looking for a new school and Montessori has a school build underway, does the bylaw automatically encapsulate those schools?
I think there's more clarity around Montessori school. However, there's no school use in place yet. It's being built. Waldorf school, we don't know where they would move if they were moving.
Yeah, but I'm just asking because I know there's a property on Dowd Drive that's got commercial in it. And so has the buffer been established around the Montessori school because it's underway or not?
Not currently. Once the school is in use, their buffer would apply, but I do believe there's already a dispensary within 300 meters.
So that dispensary would be able to continue.
It'd be legally non-conforming once the school use was in place.
Okay, so it's not just once it's zoned as a school, it's once it's in use as a school.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I had Councillor Race.
Well, I was going to move it. To maintain 300 meters and add 300 meters from the Brennan Park Recreation Center.
We have a second. Seconded by Councillor Elliott, because she put her hand up the highest. Mayor Heinzman on the motion?
Yeah, I'm happy to support that. It's not, we're not including the motion on the other ones yet.
Correct. Anybody want to? Councillor Scott?
I don't think I can support the motion. The Brennan Park, I just don't even see why we're putting it around there. Yes, the future may include retail space, but I think by then the buffer zones will be gone anyways. I don't mind the 300 downtown and in other areas, but just putting a big buffer zone around there that actually goes into the other side makes no sense to me, so I'm not going to support the motion.
Councillor Elliott, Mayor Heinzman.
I like this motion. I think it's a good compromise, and it doesn't preclude anyone from coming to council for a variance where common sense would prevail. So I think this is the right measure at this time, and I think this council has shown its openness to look at this industry in a fair-minded way, so I'm not concerned at this time.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. There is a school right beside Brennan Park right now, so there should be a buffer there anyway. I suspect if we actually, and I think this is where we get into the property line thing, I agree, like, maybe we can just make the buffer on the east side of the highway and not the west side, and it doesn't have to be so restricted to 300 meters, just make it make sense.
So, does the seconder agree with that?
I didn't move it, so.
You didn't move.
I moved it.
Does the mover agree?
300 meters up to
the highway.
Up to the highway.
Good for everybody? So I'll speak on this. I'm not going to support it. I think prohibition and overregulation is not a good idea for all the reasons I said before. But anyway, we'll move on. If there's any other comments, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Blackman, both opposed.
And Councillor Price.
Oh, and Councillor Price.
He is in your blind spot.
You're my blind spot. I'm sorry,
Sorry,
Councillor
it
Price.
was Councillor Prior, Chappelle, and
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so staff has we've got clarity on that motion. Now, I don't know if we need a motion per se, but if somebody wants to make one that any of these be included, because we've already just adopted something that is not the staff recommendation, so I'm assuming that if we just don't move any of the staff recommendations, none of these will be included. Does everybody on council concur? Yes, go ahead.
What is he going to say? What was the rationale behind excluding alcohol sales from I-9? When we did that?
The retail use in I-9 was specifically to be serving the Sea to Sky Business Park as it's written, and the author of the bylaw, or I suppose, didn't include alcohol as that. It's my assumption.
It's not business services. It's more of a residential service. The businesses that go into that I-9 zone are supposed to be the ones that are kind of serving the greater park area.
So and I remember, I'm glad you said that, because the rationale was we weren't gonna let any retail go in there. And we thought, okay, if they're a coffee shop or a restaurant and they're serving the employees that work in that area, then we permit it. Would it be allowed in, for example, in the zoning that's around the hotels?
Alcohol sales?
It has one at the hotel.
Well, I know there is alcohol, no dispensary.
No, it has to be a retail use as a permitted use.
I'm going to suggest that we don't have it in I-9. I'll leave that. But all the other ones will.
We have a seconded by Councillor Elliott.
And I'll speak to, I just think we need to be consistent about the intent of why we allowed retail in that area to begin with. So if we want to do a comprehensive change to I-9 or deal with the spot zoning, I'm fine with that. But the intent of it was not to just simply open it up to retail. We specifically tried to minimize that, so we weren't competing with downtown and some other retail areas. So I'm happy to keep with the intent of what we were trying to achieve on that particular one.
I'll offer the counter argument to that, and the fact that this is a special kind of retail that's not really allowed in many other zones, so, and particularly maybe a store of a sizable footprint, so I'll oppose the motion.
It's just small retail, is it not? If you do a big, like if you're a superstore, you can go in, I know, can you not? It's just a retail under a certain size, isn't it?
No, any retail.
I believe it's any retail.
All the big retailers across the street.
Are they
So-
in ID?
I thought that particular building in that area got changed for zoning to allow retail use.
Through and stuff.
That's why we allowed it. If you want to change that, that's fine.
I'm gonna let staff take a few minutes to look at that, but Councillor Chappelle and then Councillor Race.
So I am also going to oppose this motion for the exact same reasons as Councilor Black and Wolf with prohibition. I just think that this entire stigma needs removing on the flat shots. And it's about creating special rules for one industry. And I think this is small business right now. And as long as it's in small business, I totally don't mind. It's already difficult enough to find places for business. And when you start putting heavy restrictions or forcing rezonings, then you're actually removing employment from your district. So I'm going to oppose this.
Okay, Councillor Race and Councillor Pryor.
Thanks, and I will not support this. I frankly don't care what goes in there. There's a number of other businesses, just going by memory, that theoretically, like a coffee shop, would serve people in the business park, but also people from the rest of the community that happen to find themselves in the business park when they want a cup of coffee. So, and financial institutions and whatever else we allow to go in there. So I think I just don't distinguish between them and this. So I'm not going to support that.
Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, well, I remember us all sweating over this rezoning out there, and we were splitting hairs on everything all the way through it, and so we micromanaged it right to what it is now, and then in the 9th hour we say, oh, sure, go ahead, go off, sell the stuff, and put in a liquor store. I mean, I think we should stick the way it is, and if somebody wants to come in and apply for a variance, make that so. I mean, it just kills me when we spend all this time rezoning something, and then 2 or 3 years later, we rezone it, like council rezones it, it's not even the proponent doing it. So I'm good the way it is. I don't support you.
So are you voting in favor or
So you'd
against?
be voting in favor of the motion.
In favor of the motion? Okay. I think we've had a good discussion on that. Let's go to the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Race, Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Blackman Wolf first. Thanks, everyone. Interesting combination. All right, and is that it for your items? I think we had
One more slide.
one more thing. Oh, right, yes. Other story.
Alright, so there's 3 more proposed changes. A suite of downtown zoning amendments were adopted by council on March 20th, 2018. These included the regulations of floor area ratio and setbacks for properties and frontages along Cleveland, south of Pemberton, and north of Main Street. But this excluded the Chieftain Plaza just north of Pemberton, which was captured by the interim C4 FAR bylaw. Third reading for the amendment bylaw, that's number 2578, 2017. Council passed the following motion that council consider extending the bylaw boundary to include Pemberton Avenue to Buckley Avenue, and that's the area above highlighted in red and yellow.
Questions on this? Councillor Cryer.
Being said, that's such a key piece of property in Squamish. Shouldn't we have like a real wholehearted discussion about what may go there instead of just saying we don't want this?
This would simply align what's been recently done on Cleveland Avenue, so it would limit floor area ratio. That would be the largest impact on that large site. There's a limit on floor area ratio, which is not unreasonable. And I think if there is an alternative solution to that floor area ratio, then there could always be a rezoning application.
So, will we ever get to a discussion on where height should go in town?
Probably.
But when everything's built, you know? We did all this research years ago on where the height should go in the community. We haven't got to that.
Would it be fair to say though that would be embedded in our downtown neighborhood plan?
Yes.
Which we have not adopted yet, but we've had lots of other things. And I think that was probably because of the OCP kind of took place in that.
Yes.
And now, but does staff have, is that on the docket in the next year or two after the OCP is done? Are we doing a downtown neighborhood plan dive-in, or is that?
A lot of what was in the downtown neighborhood plan has been incorporated into this OCP. I think I'm cautious about talking what's in the OCP because of the public hearing and where we're at. But this would be in line with the vision of the OCP.
Okay. And, but maybe, I guess specifically Councillor Crier's point around height, I guess it would always, it's always theoretically possible then for council to have a dive into that at a certain point.
Absolutely.
But it's more of a detailed sort of design analysis as opposed to, some of our wider, broader goals around land use and densities and things like that. But anyway, I'll let everybody else speak. Councillor Elliott, Mayor Hengsman, Chappelle, Race.
Why aren't we extending it to the other side of the street?
It only applies to properties that are zoned C4, and the properties across the street are not zoned C4.
Are they industrial?
I believe they're zoned C2.
It's gas station specific.
Gas station.
Right.
C2.
Okay.
Mayor Hengsman.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, my question was, as long as C4, if it's rezoned to C4 along that area, it's given the same treatment. And the only thing is, it's a big lot that extends right from the mall to Cleveland. And so I'm not necessarily as concerned about some height on the backside or the west side of the lot. So I'm thinking the Cleveland Avenue rules just apply to the strip that would be along the Cleveland Avenue and not to the whole lot necessarily.
because the lot is very wide.
They-
And essentially goes from Second Avenue to Cleveland. So the stuff that's fronted, that theoretically on the west side should be more Second Avenue rules, and the stuff that's fronting on Cleveland should be more Cleveland rules, should they not?
I believe there are two lots. So the lot that's highlighted in the image does not include the Save-On-Foods and Shoppers Drug
No.
Mart area.
I know, but the
I think she could count.
back side of that lot is essentially the straight row of Second Avenue, so it extends the,
Oh.
yeah,
It's in line, yeah.
it's Second Avenue,
No. Oh, yeah,
yes.
yeah, which is the parking lot.
It's a lot that goes from Cleveland to Second essentially, which is a parking lot. And so if there was a line through the middle, I would say the stuff fronting on Cleveland should have Cleveland rules. Stuff fronting on the mall or Second Avenue should have Second Avenue rules, should it not?
Well, it's a large lot, and the only thing that this bylaw would limit is, so it would impact the Cleveland frontage for the step backs, but it would limit FAR for the whole property. But because this property is so big, an FAR of, what is it, 175?
Yeah, 1.7.
1.75 is fairly generous. So it would, the FAR limitations would apply to the whole property. There would be certain limitations that apply to the Cleveland frontage only.
That's my problem is I think the FAR should bisect the property and deal with Cleveland Avenue in terms of the FAR, but to Councilor Pryor's point, maybe we would allow more FAR or higher heights, if that's the case, on the Second Avenue side.
Absolutely, and I think we could deal with that through a rezoning process.
That was going to be my comment around Councillor Pryor's comment, is that if somebody's looking at putting in a very substantial, iconic structure there, that it's best not to say, oh, well, we'll give you 4 FAR or something, do what you want with it, versus this is sort of the bare minimum if somebody wants to do something very standard, and then if somebody wants to come in with an iconic structure with higher FAR or whatever, then we would do rezoning at that point and then go through the design review process in that way. So I'm comfortable with this. I mean, I agree that 175 is still pretty high for that area. But get around the rest of the table though. Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Race.
And so I think this is really prescriptive of architect type. So basically, along Cleveland Avenue, we've already got an area where we've decided this is how it's gonna look, and all the buildings are gonna look like that. And I was walking down Cleveland Avenue the other day, looking at it, thinking, there's gonna be no architect, there's gonna be no differences, it's all gonna look the same, and I'm not up for that. So including another lot and just keeping going with this same architect, West Coast, with no straight buildings and no differences, is not the kind of town that I want to really look at all the time, is with the exact same architect style going up and down the main street. So I'm not in favor of this.
Okay, Councillor Race.
Thank you. And I am in favor of it because I think, I think it was Council Pryor said it was a key lot. And for me, this is a view issue and an appearance issue. And so I would want to be consistent with Cleveland Avenue. That's the reason we step back Cleveland Avenue. And I would actually even extend it along to Buckley. So it goes both on the angle as well as on Cleveland. I agree it doesn't have to go on the backside, fronting into the parking lot. It's not quite the same there, but I agree with it there. But just let me clarify, right now, the way this is written, it does not include the Buckley Avenue corner side?
No.
No.
It only applies to C4 zone properties.
No, but on the property that's outlined, there's frontage on Cleveland Avenue. There's also frontage on Buckley, which is the angle.
That's Bailey.
Or Bailey, I beg your pardon, not Buckley, Bailey.
Yeah, so the upper story step backs would only apply to Cleveland.
Right, that's my problem. So I think it should also apply to Bailey. because I think that's the view part. And so it doesn't make any sense to me to have a step back on Cleveland and go right bang to the property line, or potentially go right to the property line on Bailey. The back side, the Save on Food side, I don't have a problem with. That's parking lot. So, but I generally agree with this, and I would, as I say, I would add that extra street as well.
Okay, Councillor Breyer.
Yeah, and to Susan's point on Cleveland, I mean, Cleveland's all little tiny lots to the south, so it's not really the same as this big lot. And to Doug's point, I agree with that. And also the lot to the north, there's the tip of that long skinny lot. We may want to require setbacks on that one as well. Or heavy. Does this include that little tiny lot where the real estate place is?
No. No, it's in the rezoning process.
Can't
Yeah.
always ask.
It's in the rezoning process.
And,
It's had 30.
we might want to try to keep that one back to some kind of setback too. The big issue that I have, and it's a little bit off topic, is height. And I don't think as a council we've got our head around height. And, I spend my time, most of my life, I've just looked at buildings. It's a hobby of mine. Buildings are a big hobby of mine. And so, the idea of 7, 6, 7, 8-story buildings and not knowing where we're going to put them in town really makes me nervous. And so, this location, to me, and in the 2000 plan, was one of the selected areas where the district might consider 8 or 12 stories. This one, because it's far back, same with the long and behind. And so, having it set back, that won't deter someone from building a nice tall building there. But I walk around, if you go down Loggers Lane now and go by the buildings being built along the water there, and you stick to their side, they're 5 and 6 stories. They're huge, huge buildings. You don't see them driving down Cleveland, so that's probably a good thing. My big worry is it's just us getting hurt along.
Okay. So, there are a few different views on this, but Mayor Hanson?
Yeah, I was thinking less about, and I think this was a mistake we did from the beginning. We should have just said Cleveland, and we have the Solterra one tonight that we excluded from the Cleveland Avenue treatment because we were going to do it rezoning, and then it doesn't meet the Cleveland Avenue treatment. But I was thinking just like Buckley to Vancouver Street, Cleveland Avenue treatment, if you want to come in for variance or whatever, you can do that. But along Cleveland, big lots that extend from street to street, it would be different on the street on the other side. So it's not so much a lot per se, it's a treatment on Cleveland. And it would include the REMAX site, it would include the gas station that will someday be rezoned. And just, it's the area as opposed to this lot, not this lot, nothing here. I think we just should have just done the whole Cleveland. And the FAR is meant to allow for that, instead of doing height restrictions, allow for that variance in architectural. That's the whole reason why we designed it this way, is to get more architectural variance than our previous rules, which were making link sausages.
All right.
So how do we make it so that it's just simply Buckley to Vancouver, Cleveland's Cleveland?
It could be done. The purpose of this update was partly following council's motion to extend it.
Yeah, but you aren't only doing it on one lot.
We are. It's a quick fix that we're trying to eliminate the possibility of a big box on that property.
So to that end, I'm going to move that we support the staff recommendation on the C4 amendment specifically, just as a stopgap measure, recognizing that there's probably more work to be done in the future, but before we get any applications in, we should just give it a seconder on that, seconded by Councillor Elliott.
How about Councillor Brace's comment on Bailey?
Well, I think that the implications of that, I don't know, does staff feel comfortable with applying that to the entire frontage of Bailey for this particular property?
We haven't looked at it. I mean, the Cleveland has a solid rationale why we wanted to have the setback or the step back. On Bailey Street, we don't have that history of low buildings or small lots. So it's something we haven't looked at.
But to apply that
It would
that
be fairly
design
easy to
rationale
apply.
into this amendment would be quite easy to do. That's not a difficult thing to add into this.
All right, well, I'll take that as a friendly amendment if the seconder will.
Yep.
So we'll be including the Bailey frontage for this new requirement, which is essentially the upper story setbacks. All right, let's put this to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Are you opposed?
Yes.
Councillor Chappelle is opposed. Motion carries.
Okay, home occupation, so we would amend home occupation to specify that only one service vehicle is permitted associated with a home occupation to reduce disturbances in residential neighborhoods. This is primarily to prevent, for example, a taxi service with multiple vehicles from establishing itself in a residential neighborhood as a home occupation.
Okay, Councillor Pryor?
Is this on private property parking?
Yes, it would be off-street parking.
So if there's a hairdresser, they can't have two cars parked out there, they can have one?
What this would apply to is if a hairdresser, for example, was a mobile hairdressing unit and they had 5 vehicles associated with that business, they wouldn't be permitted to occupy out of a residential home.
So their customers would park on the street?
No, they're mobile.
They're mobile.
No, this is not the
It's not
customer's
customers.
vehicles, this is vehicles associated with the business.
Okay. Councillor Elliott?
If I am an electrician and I have 4 service vehicles, that means I can't park them all on my private property at night. So my employees come every day and pick up a service vehicle and go and do their, that's what we're talking about.
That would be correct, yes.
Question from Councillor Chappelle?
Why not 2?
The issue that has been presented to staff is that often in, for example, townhouse and or apartment buildings where home occupations are permitted, certain businesses that have multiple vehicles associated with the fleet may be setting up there and there may not be available off-street parking. So to reduce the number of service vehicles in residential neighborhoods, this was a proposed fix.
Is there a proposal that has a place where people can actually park their vehicles, their service vehicles, or is that left up to, even if you have a business, there's no place to park them?
So,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about what Councillor Elliott was mentioning. I'm just wondering if there might be a different way to approach that, like in terms of, I don't know, in terms of our on-street, like, because I can understand like the impact on on-street parking and how that plays out, but on the other hand, you know, who are we to tell somebody that, you know, they can't have 4 cars in their driveway? I mean, if that's what somebody wants to do, they can do that, right? And just because they happen to be emblazoned with the logo of a company, are we gonna penalize them for that? But, I mean, theoretically, in a strata, you probably wouldn't have that access to a 4-car driveway. Right, it would work itself out in the strata bylaws. But anyway, that was just my thought on that, but Councillor Race.
Thank you. No, and I agree with this because I think the example that's used of several trucks for a business, whether it's electrical or plumbing or whatever, a residential neighborhood, I think is an abuse of the home occupation bylaw. Those are the types of businesses that should be in the business park. We have them, and they're there because they don't want to pay commercial taxes or whatever. So I absolutely support this. I think there's enough vehicles introduced into our residential neighborhoods, when we add in suites, daycares, all the other things that we allow to go on in the residential neighborhoods now, to have a business parking for trucks or service vehicles or whatever on a residential neighborhood is beyond the limit. So I absolutely support this. I think this is long overdue.
Councillor Elliott.
Well, I guess my confusion is private property versus on-street parking. Does the bylaw say that it's on-street parking?
The bylaw only speaks to off-street parking as it speaks to parking regulations. So somebody may be required to provide so many parking spaces with their residents, not necessarily required to provide additional parking spaces for a home occupation.
I think this one has unintended consequences for some family-owned businesses. And I'm not sure I want to go that far on this one. I think in multifamily developments, it can be regulated by the strata. And certainly, knowing our strata, we would do that really quickly. And then if it's my home, my driveway, and those cars are parked on my private property, I don't think it's anybody's business but mine if they're all emblazoned with my logo. And I've seen examples of that. I'm not sure I really support this one.
Okay, we've got a couple hands from staff, and then we're going to go to Councillor Pryor and Councillor Chappelle.
The issues that we normally see is on smaller residential properties where businesses like a taxi will start parking their commercial vehicles, and sometimes that will push out the residential vehicles onto the street. So maybe one way of approaching it would be to allow multiple commercial vehicles on larger properties as a solution.
Okay, Councillor Pryor.
Well, I see parking issues everywhere, but I don't know, I can understand not wanting to live in a house where the guy next door opens a taxi service and on his property he's turned his whole front yard into a parking lot. I really understand that. And I used to work for a guy that turned his whole residential yard into 6 trucks. He'd go there and drive a truck every morning. It's not pretty, I can understand that. I sure, the little guys that have 1 or 2 trucks starting out in a business, a garage door guy or an electrician with a couple of vehicles, boy, I don't know where everyone's going to park. I don't know where they're going to find the cash to afford to go to the business park and have a parking spot. I remember we did this a few years ago to the tool guy. Remember he had his van parked in his yard and we banned. The neighbors were complaining because he had his big tool truck parked, and so we kicked him out of there.
That was a weight issue.
Yeah,
That was a size issue.
Anyway, so it's a tough one. It's not just a simple little thing to get my head around.
Councillor Chappelle, Mayor Heitzman.
Yeah, I have the same concerns. If it's a private lot, and people are trying to run a small business, it's the same concerns as other small business discussions we've had today. There's already a lot of restrictions in our district. We don't have a parking area. There's no place where people can actually put their trucks. People are already using municipal land, and we don't ding them for using municipal land. We don't even have permits, so people can park on municipal land for free. We don't discourage it. We don't ticket it. So I don't know why you would pick on small businesses at home. I think that maybe stratas, if they want to make this rule, and they're concerned about people parking, this should be a strata issue, not a district issue. It's already hard enough to run small business in this town. So I'm going to oppose this.
Yeah, I sort of see the rationale of if a fleet gets too big for a residential area, it's just too big. Maybe 1 vehicle isn't enough, maybe 2 is reasonable. I think as soon as you get to 3 or 4, you're talking about a business with significant employees, and then you should start looking at alternatives, but maybe 1 is a little too restrictive. But if you start to have 4 or 5 fleet, like if you actually have a fleet, it's more appropriate in a different spot.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
So maybe I let us down a garden path. Because now when I'm looking at the wording in here, it's more about businesses are only permitted to see a maximum of 1 client at a time. So are we talking about people coming to the house, or people, or the vehicles belonging to the business?
Business vehicles, not customers.
Currently, the definition of home occupation limits the amount of clients you can see in their home to 1 at a time. And that is, again, to address parking, but this would limit the number of vehicles associated with the business to 1. So 1 service vehicle.
Okay, so we already have the rules around the 1 visitor, and now you're adding a rule around the number of
Service vehicles, yes.
1's not enough. So, I mean, you know, Sean and I have a home-based business. We are a 1-car family, but if I had 2 cars, both those cars are associated with my business. So am I only allowed to have 1?
No, I think it would be vehicles that are registered through the business. I don't think we're going to get into looking at whether or not your personal vehicle is used for, as my wife says, but it's commercially registered to that business. Those are the vehicles we're looking at, not personal vehicles.
But we have to be careful because a lot of people with incorporated businesses register the car to the business, but it's their business car. But I just, like 1 just seems, like why 1?
We can make it.
You can make it 2.
2, if that will work better.
Okay, so I have Councillor Ace, Councillor Kent. I'm sensing though that 2 might be a good compromise on this issue. I'm just going to take a pulse of council right now, noting the time.
I think 2 is reasonable, we get to 3 or 4.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to, I think Mayor Heinzen's going to move a motion.
Okay, I'm moving 2.
Seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Now, if there's no further discussion.
I had my hand up, Speaker.
Yeah, okay.
So the reason I think, for me, the reason it's 1 is because of the impact in the neighborhood. And it is consistent with our definition of home-based business, which at the same time would only allow 1 customer, a business with 1 customer at a time. And that's also to minimize the impact on the neighborhood. Keep in mind, these are predominantly residential neighborhoods. They're intended as residential neighborhoods. And so when you have workers coming and going with the company truck or the company car, right off the bat, if it's more than 1, then you're starting to offend that whole notion of our definition of home-based businesses. We're taking a business that could be in a business area and we're putting in a residential neighborhood. And so it's not carte blanche. It's not private property. You can do anything you want with it. That's why we have zoning, and that's the limit. And I think that's a very good limit. If you wanted to have 2 customers, 2 trucks, 2 vehicles, 2 whatevers, we would have had 2 customers, but we don't. We have 1 in the home-based businesses.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Chappelle?
I don't know if our business licenses, actually, we give out business licenses to people that see more than 1 client in the home. So I don't know how all of this aligns with the actual giving out. When I look at the amount of business licenses that we have for home-based occupation, a lot of them are businesses that are consulting businesses that have multiple people over at the same time, that are design businesses, and we don't monitor that. So I think that's worthy of a discussion, absolutely, because people, but also we don't have places to put businesses, so people are working out at home. So it's a double-edged sword. If you don't have a place to put your business, you have your business, your option for employment is working out of home. But if we're issuing business licenses for businesses that have multiple people, yet our bylaw says 1 person, there needs to be a bigger, like it's 5 o'clock. This is a ridiculous discussion to be having at 5 o'clock. when we have when we have a big council meeting tonight as well, this warrants a lengthy and involved discussion on home-based business. So I move that we defer, I can't move it, well, I'll just turn
It's a
down the
motion on two company
Yeah.
vehicles.
Two.
I'm gonna support the motion, I seconded the motion, but I think this is worthy of a discussion to see where our business licensing, we still don't know,
On the motion.
we still don't know what our business licenses are. We still don't know who's working where. So making up rules for things makes no sense to me when we don't know what kind of employment we have at home.
That sounds like maybe a public and corporate services committee item, so you might want to approach the chair on that
Thank
one.
you.
And that could
I'm approaching
be
the chair
approached.
on that.
Okay, Councillor Pryor, 60
Yeah.
seconds or less.
Well, I'm okay with 2 because this bylaw
Okay,
is
he's okay with 2.
complaint driven, right? Get a complaint, we got 2. I mean, I go to an architect's place sometimes.
Okay,
three or four
let's call the
people.
question.
Good.
And they should have the.
I'm okay with 2. Lots of my neighbors have 2 trucks, and I'm okay with that. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Race is opposed. Motion carries. Okay. One more. I actually thought this was going to be a short meeting today.
And we didn't even have permit yet.
Very lucky. Okay,
That's probably
thank you for bearing with us, staff.
Last item, so the residential small lot zone, RS3, was first adopted by council in 2013 for 3-lot subdivision. There have been a total of 8 successful rezonings to the RS3 zone. Generally, however, the dwellings are larger than what was originally envisioned for the zone and tend to not necessarily fit in with the neighborhood. The FAR and height are similar to what is permitted in the RS2 and RS1 zones. However, the setbacks are reduced and the lot coverage is increased. Staff are suggesting to make these small lot infill subdivisions more attractive to existing neighborhoods that we explore reducing the FAR lot coverage and increasing the setbacks.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Councillor Ray, second by Mayor Heinzman. I don't see any dissenting voices. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that everybody else agrees, so let's take a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Great argument.
It is a good one. Yes, Councillor.
Quick question. So we got an email during the week from someone with a business license. I think it's more about water utility charges related to her business versus this bylaw, but where do we talk about that? Or can we refer it to staff? Or
We have, we've already referred it to staff and we're looking into it. And part of we send out water bills based on classification coming from the business licenses. So we're taking a look at it right now because we're doing all these amendments.
Okay, great, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, we have one more item on the agenda. And this is UBCM funding request for bridge on Pemberton.
Just a little one.
Just a little bridge. Well, here we
I can
go.
clarify perhaps. Good afternoon, Dave Marrow, Director of Major Projects. I will try to be very quick on this. Just a note of clarification on the title of the memo and the date. The memo was originally prepared prior to last year's UBCM. And what we're sort of looking for in this memo will actually, the decisions and the negotiations with the province will need to be done before this year's UBCM. So essentially, I've been in front of you a few times to talk about the bridge. I'll go through a bit of the detail on the background just for context, but I'll be quick. So essentially, waterfront landing development traffic impact assessment determined that the Pemberton Bridge is going to be required in year 2030. It identified that the majority of the traffic using that bridge will be from the oceanfront development and infill downtown, and to a lesser extent, the waterfront landing development. The developer for waterfront landing is building associated infrastructure, including Laurelwood Drive to the south of the bridge, rail overpass, and a connection to the highway at Clark Drive that will basically allow that Pemberton Bridge to function as a new entrance and egress from downtown. So the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, as a condition of their approval of waterfront landing rezoning and OCP amendment bylaws, requested that the district provide a plan for the delivery of this bridge within 1 year, which is roughly the end of June 2018. And that plan was, one of the things that plan needed to detail was proposed funding mechanisms for the bridge. So since then, staff has been looking into this, and obviously one option, as it's been identified and confirmed through independent consultant, as a district-wide piece of infrastructure as opposed to specific to the development. We are looking to include it in the DCC bylaw update, which is just underway. However, as we've noted, the road DCC reserve fund is not that robust. There's a lot of sort of high-value projects in the DCC bylaw already, road infrastructure projects. So it's unlikely that we'll have enough funds to fund the entire bridge. So we're also looking at other options, one of which is potentially the province. So the district understands that the ministry's position on the need for the bridge is driven in some part by congestion and design issues at the existing Cleveland Avenue and Highway 99 intersection. So with the delivery of this bridge, providing a new entrance and egress from downtown, that alleviates some of those issues and resolves some of the issues at that intersection that the ministry has. So with that being said, it's not unreasonable that the ministry would be willing or should be responsible to provide some level of funding to the bridge. Since the memo was written, staff have actually had a meeting with ministry staff, and the ministry has indicated that they're open to discussing funding and working with district staff to progress on that. So what they've requested is that district staff sort of help to present a business case for funding. And essentially that's going to be looking at existing data, looking at the traffic impact assessment, traffic projections, and traffic modeling, and sort of quantify the amount of traffic that we will be able to get off of the highway section from Clark Drive to Cleveland, and also the number of vehicles that we can get off get out of the intersection of Cleveland and Highway 99. So essentially that's Valley Cliff traffic coming across this new connection down into downtown, and also people commuting to the south from downtown. So district staff is working on that. Ministry staff also suggested that we should be looking for other provincial and federal funding. Two of the options that were thrown out were Bike BC and Build Canada. So essentially that's where we're at in the process, and we're looking for support from Mayor and Council in pursuing funding from the Ministry of Transportation, and also enabling staff to work with provincial and federal staff to secure funding for this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you. And so what would the timeline be? I mean, what if we got a grant like this, how quickly would we have to use it? Because there's going to be a municipal contribution as well. I mean, is that something we would be facing within the next 2 or 3 years, or when, and could we?
Through the chair, very good question. And at this point, we don't have a ton of detail. A lot will be answered once we get this into the DCC bylaw and we start to see, what impact the rates are and the available funding through the DCC bylaw. And I think moving forward, the plan is to sort of prepare this business case and then advance the talks with the ministry. And at that point, we would probably have a sense of funding restrictions and timelines on that.
Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks. Any preliminary numbers on the cost of that bridge?
There is a conceptual design completed, and actually the waterfront landing developer retained a consultant to do a conceptual design for the bridge, just to ensure that it works with the infrastructure that they're building as part of their project and Laurel Drive. There is a cost estimate associated with that. I'm in talks with the developer to obtain that, and we should have that very soon, but I don't have a number for you.
20 million?
No. Probably not.
Mayor. Councillor Kent.
So the imperative isn't until 2030.
Yes.
How does this compete with other priorities that we may want to get funding and grants for, if it's not really needed until 2030? And you could argue it's needed today for safety reasons, but from traffic management reasons, it's not needed until 2030.
That's a good question. One that maybe warrants some more discussion with council.
Part of in the meeting with MOTI, what they said is because the bridge itself is separated from provincial infrastructure, they can't actually fund any of the bridge directly. So, but what they can fund is other infrastructure. So we may be able to get and they don't fund developers. So they may be able to fund some of certainly not committing to, but may be able to fund some of the intersection improvements at Clark. But that funding will then need to flow through. So there is some timeliness on getting that part of the funding commitment to. The rest, we would agree, is we can work for long-term DCC funding, and then closer to the date we're physically going to build the bridge.
So if I can just follow up, the memo alludes to the fact that MOTI needs to take pressure off their own problem they've created with the bad design of the Cleveland intersection and other pieces. So this is a solution they've imposed on us to solve their problem that they have caused by their design issues. And yet they can't put money towards it. So this whole thing just sounds a little wonky to me.
Not to the bridge.
I know, but they're telling us we have to put a bridge in because their intersections on the highway are going to fail. So I think there's a conversation to be had with MOTI, and I think that they, regardless of what they say, what they can or won't fund, there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had with the ministry, with the government, about their failure of the highway and their need to come to the table on finding solutions.
And I think if Mr. Marrow and I can provide you a good business case, I think then you will have a stronger voice with the ministers and the ADMs that the council talks to. We talk to the techs and the guys sort of lower down, but we're hoping to give you a good business case to have a stronger discussion.
Councillor Kent.
Absolutely, thanks. Question, the Build BC fund, I read something about that not too long ago, but I don't remember exactly what was available in that. Do you have any?
I don't have any details at this point.
I remember it was very substantial, I think, though. There was some good monies available.
So I'll just add that I kind of was going where Mayor Heisman was going on this, is that I think it's good that staff has gotten the ball rolling with their counterparts at the province, but we're going to have to really, I think this is more of a political decision as well, and because we are a very fast-growing community, I think we can make a pretty good case about that, as well as the failures of, the earlier design. So, and I don't know, I mean, in a perfect world, they fund it sort of like they do other major capital things, like I'm thinking, 40, 40, and then 20 for us. So 40% feds, 40% province. I mean, having that kind of objective, to me, that seems reasonable for such a major piece of.
We fund bridges in Lower Mainland all the time.
Yeah, so, and given that it is a new government, you never know, there may be more willingness to explore that. So I'm happy to see that go forward, because I think it is also just a safety issue too. We need to have a second exit out of town. So, Councillor Byrne.
I think 2030 is wishful thinking. I think we'll need it before that.
Okay, and who knows, maybe we get a really fancy bike trail or something on there, and they can use some bike money to.
That's the plan.
Anyway, okay, I think we're gonna wrap this item up. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else from council, I'll entertain a motion to terminate the meeting. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Thank you.